Chapter 2367. Chu Liyue's heart skipped a beat. In the palace of the illusory god, other than the main hall, there were many courtyards. The height of these courtyards was basically the same. In other words, standing here it was impossible to see the situation inside. But she had just asked such a question. Most importantly, even in the illusion of the Red Moon Desert, she had not been to any other place besides the main hall. In other words, she really should not have known that there was another courtyard in the innermost area. Su Li glanced at Chu Liyue and immediately smiled. Oh, about this, I had accidentally mentioned it to little Yue before. Fifth Divine Envoy, you wouldn't mind, right? Wan Jianfeng glanced at Su Li. Su Li's lips slightly pursed and her eyes were clear. She seemed to be a little nervous. I didn't know where it was at that time. I just casually mentioned it. Wan Jianfeng retracted his gaze and coldly said, that is the residence of the first Divine Envoy. Without permission, no one is allowed to go near it. If anyone dares to violate it, they will die. Chu Liyue's eyes narrowed. The residence of the first Divine Envoy? She once again looked in that direction. Although she could not see anything through the eaves and walls, her heart was still shrouded in an extremely subtle feeling. Why did she say those words just now? After one glance, Chu Liyue retracted her gaze and looked down slightly. Thank you for your reminder, Fifth Divine Envoy. Seeing that she was indeed curious and did not have any other intentions, Wan Jianfeng finally let this matter pass. After walking for another quarter of an hour, he brought Chu Liyue and Su Li to a courtyard. From today onwards you will be living here. Other than the few places that the second Divine Envoy mentioned, it's best that you don't casually walk around the entire palace of the illusory god. Otherwise you won't even know when you get into trouble. Wan Jianfeng's voice was as cold as ever. If you cause any trouble, no one will help you. Originally, Chu Liyue came from the Star Path. The seventh Divine Envoy, Jin Yunlai, should have been half her backer. At the very least, she should have been biased towards her. Unfortunately, it was already not easy for him to protect himself. What else could he talk about? Moreover, because he didn't have a bloodline totem, his attitude towards Chu Liyue had been very cold. But now Chu Liyue had relied on his own ability to get in. This was undoubtedly a slap to Jin Yunlai's face. When he saw Chu Liyue, he wasn't in a good mood either. Therefore, although Chu Liyue had entered the illusory god palace, his situation was not optimistic. However, Chu Liyue didn't care. She smiled. I know. Wan Jianfeng didn't stay for too long. He left after giving out the necessary instructions. This time only Chu Liyue and Su Li were left at the door. Chu Liyue watched Wan Jianfeng's figure disappear before saying, Mr. Su, let's talk inside. After entering the courtyard, Chu Liyue quickly looked around. This place wasn't big and the furnishings were very simple. It was just an ordinary small courtyard and it seemed that no one had lived here for a long time. Fortunately, it was clean. Chu Liyue and Su Li entered the house. Just as they closed the door, Su Li couldn't help but ask. Little Yue, what happened just now? Why did you suddenly ask about the first Divine Envoy's residence? Chu Liyue helplessly laughed bitterly. Mr. Su, I really don't know where it is. If I knew, I wouldn't have asked that question. Who didn't know that the first Divine Envoy had a special identity? Even the other Divine Envoys didn't dare to offend him. Why would she be so stubborn as to touch this bad luck? Su Li thought about it and agreed. But why did you suddenly ask me that question? I remember that I didn't mention this to you before. Chu Liyue tapped her finger on the armrest and thought for a moment before saying, this. If I say that I don't know, would Mr. Su believe me? Su Li was startled. What do you mean? Chu Liyue rubbed her forehead. It was really troublesome to explain this matter. It's probably because I left some impression in the Red Moon Desert previously. She changed the topic. Su Li instantly understood. That's right, I almost forgot about this. Obviously she believed Chu Liyue. Chu Liyue changed the topic. Did you find anything here recently? Su Li sighed. There's no substantial progress. Chu Liyue wasn't surprised. From the attitude of the Zhou Xian and the rest, it could be seen that they were very strict with the palace of the illusory god. Under such circumstances, it was extremely difficult to find out anything. De Bao and Lan Shao must have been locked in an extremely secret place. This matter can't be rushed. It's better to take it slow. No matter what, now that we've entered the palace of the illusory god, we're finally one step closer. Su Li nodded. Nan Jinshu originally planned to return to his residence, but after taking a few steps he saw Jun Jiuqing walking out of the main palace. He hesitated for a moment but still went over. Family E. Jun Jiuqing's gaze landed on him indifferently. Nan Jinshu suddenly felt a chill in his heart. For some reason he felt that Jun Jiuqing's state today was a little different from usual. It seemed like he wasn't in a good mood. But didn't he just come out of the main palace? Not many people could have this kind of glory. He didn't have it either. Because of this, Nan Jinshu was envious of him for a long time. So when he saw Jun Jiuqing's current state he really couldn't understand. However, this wasn't the main point. Family E Shangguanyu is here. Jun Jiuqing's expression didn't change. I know. Seeing how calm he was, Nan Jinshu instantly became anxious. Family E, aren't you curious or nervous at all? That's Shangguan you were talking about. Haven't you thought about how she came in without a bloodline totem? Jun Jiuqing didn't say anything. Nan Jinshu gritted his teeth and lowered his voice. The Guqin score. It must be because of the Guqin score. The first 2 Guqin scores are with her. At first, Nan Jinshu couldn't understand how Chu Luiyue broke the rules and successfully entered the illusion god's palace. Until just now he suddenly realized that it must be because of the Guqin score. That belongs to the illusion god's palace. Since she's already its master, of course she can enter. Nan Jinshu regretted it. He should have thought of this earlier. Otherwise he wouldn't have offended her like that and dug such a big hole for himself. Now even if he wanted to make peace there was no hope. Jun Jiuqing looked a little impatient. I know what you're talking about. What are you trying to say? Nan Jinshu's chest tightened. Why did it seem like Jun Jiuqing didn't care about such an important matter? Chapter 2368. That music score belongs to the illusion god palace. The divine master and the divine envoys haven't done anything yet. What can you do about it? Jun Jiuqing's voice was cold. Nan Jinshu was taken aback and hurriedly said, it's not that I want to do anything. I'm just curious. The first divine envoy sent 2 divine envoys to the god-slaying mound to look for the 3rd music score, but they haven't returned yet. Are you talking about the 9th and 10th divine envoys? Jun Jiuqing interrupted him with a half-smile. They've returned a long time ago. Don't you know? What? Nan Jinshu was stunned for a moment. He really didn't know. Ever since he fought with Chu Luiyue and Mu Hongyu and returned to the illusion god palace, he hadn't left his room. Because what happened that day was simply too humiliating. He had no choice but to wait for things to settle down. That was why he didn't know what was going on outside, including the fact that the 2 divine masters had returned. Not only have they returned, but they're also being punished in the illusion god ocean, Jun Jiuqing said flatly. Nan Jinshu was stunned. He couldn't snap out of his daze for a long time. How is that possible? The 2 divine envoys were ordered to look for the 3rd music score. Even if they didn't find it, they shouldn't have been punished, right? Then do you know why they were punished? Jun Jiuqing smiled coldly. If you want to know, you can ask them yourself. After he finished speaking, he ignored Nan Jinshu and left. Nan Jinshu wanted to ask him a few more questions, but he didn't have the guts. Jun Jiuqing always gave him the feeling that he couldn't afford to offend him. Nan Jinshu couldn't get anything out of Jun Jiuqing, so he had no choice but to leave. Chang Wanzhou was wiping the table in the room. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing his fair and slender wrists. He was holding a rag in his hand. His expression was focused and serious, as if this was something very important. When Xinyi entered, this was the scene he saw. However, the moment he walked in, Chang Wanzhou immediately sensed his presence. He stopped what he was doing and turned around to look at him. Chang Wanzhou's lips moved as if he wanted to say something, but he held back in the end. However, his gaze towards Xinyi was filled with respect. Xinyi's gaze swept across the table. It was shiny and shiny. She really didn't know how many times he had wiped it. In fact, Chang Wanzhou had been doing this ever since Chu Luiyue went to the Star Passage and entered the Illusory God Palace. It seemed to be out of some uneasiness. When he was nervous or flustered, he would often do this. Master has already entered the Illusory God Palace, so there is no need to clean this place. Xinyi Dao. Chang Wanzhou pursed his lips slightly. Yes. Chu Luiyue didn't stay in the Illusory God Palace for too long. After chatting with Su Li, she planned to go back first. After all, Wu Yao and the others were still waiting outside. Those who were allowed to enter the illusory god palace could enter and leave freely, so even if she wanted to leave now, she wouldn't encounter any obstruction. However, as soon as she stepped out, she saw a familiar face. Xu Jing. At this moment she was standing outside the door, her eyes filled with resentment and unwillingness. "Oh, 8th Divine Envoy, why are you here?" Probably because she didn't expect Chu Luiyue to suddenly come out, a trace of guilt flashed across Xu Jing's face. Hearing that Chu Luiyue really finished the star passage and successfully entered the illusory god palace, Xu Jing's heart surged with waves that couldn't be calmed down for a long time. After struggling for a long time, she still came here. Originally, she just wanted to see what was going on, but who knew that Chu Luiyue would actually come out like this, and the two sides just happened to bump into each other. Xu Jing managed to control the expression on her face with difficulty. "Nothing, I'm just a little curious as to how you came in." Chu Luiyue's lips curved. "Naturally, I walked in openly." Xu Jing unconsciously clenched her fists. "I really underestimated you before." "Thank you for the praise, 8th Divine Envoy." Chu Luiyue smiled. "I like to surprise people the most. You really have a sharp tongue." Xu Jing took a deep breath. "It won't be too late to show off in front of this divine envoy when you ascend to the heavens and become a god." She didn't believe that Chu Luiyue would really succeed when the time came. "8th Divine Envoy, you misunderstood me. When have I ever thought of showing off in front of the divine envoys? What's more, what I said was the truth. Could it be that in this illusory god palace, people like us can't even speak the truth? Or did the 8th Divine Envoy feel that these words were too harsh?" Chu Luiyue was really innocent. She had never taken the initiative to provoke this 8th Divine Envoy, but unfortunately, the other party always seemed to dislike her and always wanted to make things difficult for her. Why bother? Xu Jing was so angry that she laughed. "You can say whatever you want. This divine envoy can't argue with you. However, since you've already entered the illusory god palace, this divine envoy will remind you. Don't be too arrogant. Otherwise, you won't even know when you'll die. And your subordinates, it's best that they all follow the rules. This illusory god palace is not a place where you can behave atrociously." After saying that, she angrily left. Chu Luiyue was left with a blank expression. Why did Xu Jing suddenly become so angry? And it seemed like it wasn't just directed at her? Chu Luiyue looked at her thoughtfully, then walked towards the door. Arriving at the door, Chu Luiyue pushed the door open and walked out. The situation was different from when she first came. This time she didn't attract that amazing pressure. Everything was very calm. But when Chu Luiyue walked out, she was surprised to find that the people who were waiting outside on both sides of the Star Road hadn't left yet. The moment she walked out, countless pairs of eyes immediately fell on her. Chu Luiyue was startled. Looking over, she finally understood why everyone was still gathered here. Xiao Ran was standing on the Star Road, cracking the last Xian formation. In front of him, just like Chu Luiyue, a silver halo quietly floated. At this time, a portion of the veined patterns had already been drawn inside the halo. It could be seen that Xiao Ran's speed was much slower than Chu Luiyue's, and the smoothness was also a bit worse. But the overall direction was correct. As long as there weren't any mistakes later, he would be able to completely display it sooner or later. At that time he would be like Chu Luiyue, entering the illusory god palace from the Star Road. Xiao Ran's entire attention was on the Xian formation in front of him, to the extent that he didn't notice Chu Luiyue coming out. However, the onlookers on both sides looked over with different expressions. Of course, compared to before, their attitudes and expressions had changed quite a bit. "Master." Little Hachi smiled and waved her hand. Chu Luiyue walked towards the few of them. Chapter 2369. "Mistress, why did you come out so quickly?" Little Hachi asked curiously. They had thought that they would have to wait for a long time. Chu Luiyue smiled and said, "I went in to find a place to stay, saw Mr. Su and Dumpling and came out." "Dumpling is also here? Is she well?" "Yes." Chu Luiyue did not say too much. She stepped forward and pinched Aunt 11 and Aunt 12's cheeks. "It's been a long time since we last met. The two of you have grown up. You must have suffered a lot in my absence all these years." It was unknown how the two young ladies managed to survive being stranded outside. Now they had even broken through to the Supreme God level. Aunt 11, who had always been calm, showed a rare look of nostalgia. "It's not hard." Aunt 12's eyes were already red. She pulled Chu Liyue's sleeve and said, "It's nothing. We're fine." It's still Master who had it the hardest. Although they had been outside, they had heard many rumors about Chu Liyue. It had not been easy for her to come all the way to where she was now. Big Brother has always taken care of us. He has never let us suffer. Hearing Aunt 12's words, Chu Liyue was relieved. Sun Yi had done a good job in this regard. He had taken care of everything. He is also in the Illusion God Palace now. I will take you to see him. Shuang and the others are also there. As she spoke, Chu Liyue glanced at Wu Yao. She had to go back and talk about the Peach Blossom Dock in detail. Wu Yao nodded imperceptibly. At this moment, Shui walked forward and cupped his fists. He said with a joyful expression, "Mistress, I haven't had time to congratulate you." When Chu Liyue finished the star path and entered the Illusion God Palace, he was too shocked and did not have time to say anything. He just watched as Chu Liyue went in. Now that he saw her come out, of course he had to go forward and congratulate her. Chu Liyue's lips curved up. Speaking of which, I still have to thank Treasure Pavilion. The mythical flame diagram had indeed helped her clear her thoughts and gave her the most appropriate reason. No matter how suspicious others were, she only needed to release the mythical flame diagram. Mingshu hurriedly waved his hands. "I wouldn't dare. You were able to succeed mainly because of your own strength. Our Zhenbao Pavilion also shares your honor and is very happy for you." These were Mingshu's heartfelt words. Over the years, it wasn't that no one had read the mythical diagram of flame, but in the end, only Chu Liyue had truly comprehended all the profound formations on the star path and entered the illusory God Palace. Wasn't this enough to explain the problem? Chu Liyue raised his eyebrows and smiled. "You're too polite. I should be the one thanking the first master and second master. When the second master's body gets better, I will definitely pay him a visit personally." She probably wouldn't be able to meet the first master. But second master. However, she insisted on meeting him no matter what. His smile froze and he secretly complained in his heart. Why was Madam still thinking about this? Then I will definitely go back and talk to second master. Then I will have to trouble Lord Mingshu. After getting the answer he wanted, Chu Liyue left with his people in satisfaction. The group of people left in such a carefree manner, leaving behind a group of people looking at each other in dismay. Just left like that? Why was the expression on Chu Liyue's face as calm and collected as ever from the beginning to the end? She had finished the star path and entered the illusory God Palace. If it were anyone else present, they would probably be extremely excited. But she was like this. How to put it, it was as if all of this was natural for her. She had long expected this, or she had long been certain that she would be able to reach this step and obtain all of this. But she was just a person from the Divine Ruins world who didn't even have a bloodline totem. In the long 10,000 years, other than the 7th Divine Emissary Jinyun Lai, she was the only one who had entered the illusory God Palace through the star path. Even they were excited about this for a long time, but she was the only one who was calm beyond imagination. In comparison, their reactions seemed a bit excessive. Many people quieted down. After a long time, a low voice came from the crowd. Now that she has even entered the illusory God Palace, will she really be able to ascend to the heavens and become a god in half a year? No one answered. They had already discovered that all of the rules and principles seemed to be useless in front of Chu Liyue. All of the so-called restrictions and impossibilities had become a joke in front of her. Then who would dare to say that she couldn't? Chu Liyue and the others walked back. As they walked, Chu Liyue asked about the two girls. What made her feel more at ease was that Sun Yi really took care of the two of them. Other than not bringing them with him, he treated them even better than Little 13. Little 13 even had to undergo Sun Yi's strict tests, but the two girls didn't need to. They only needed to work hard to eat their fill. Compared to other people, the two of them didn't need to cultivate because the pills they swallowed contained a shocking amount of energy. And the two of them had special physiques so they could completely digest all of it and convert it into their own strength. As a result, his strength naturally increased. This was something that others couldn't help but envy. And 11 thought for a while and asked, "Master, what is it like inside the illusory God Palace?" Chu Liyue only thought that she was curious, so she paused for a moment and said, "Actually, there's nothing special, just that the spiritual power is more abundant and pure." Aunt 11 pursed her lips. "Master, can you bring us in to take a look?" Chu Liyue was really surprised this time. Aunt 11, you want to go in and take a look? Aunt 11 nodded and added, Sister also wants to go. Aunt 12 nodded lightly and looked at Tu Liwei nervously. Mistress, is this inconvenient? I heard that ordinary people aren't allowed to enter the palace of the illusory god. It wouldn't be good if it made things difficult for Master. Tu Liwei looked at the two of them thoughtfully. Probably because she had to take care of her sister. Aunt 11 had been independent since young and didn't like to trouble others. If she could do it herself, she would never ask others to help her. So she rarely took the initiative to ask for anything. As for Aunt 12, that was even more so. She had a soft personality and was very timid. Usually, if her tone was a little harsh, it would scare the little girl until her eyes turned red. Other than being obedient, she was obedient. She was extremely well behaved. And now these two girls actually wanted to enter the illusory god palace to take a look? How rare. Tu Liwei said, the illusory god palace is heavily guarded, so it's not easy to go in. Even I can't bring you in now. The expressions of the two girls dimmed significantly. Tu Liwei's heart skipped a beat and couldn't help but ask, why do you want to go in so badly? Chapter 2370. Aunt 11 paused for a moment and said straightforwardly, no reason, I just want to go. Aunt 12 nodded. But if Mistress is so difficult, we won't go. Tu Liwei thought for a while and touched the duo's faces. I'll think of a way. The two girls rarely asked her for anything. If there was hope, she would still want to satisfy their wishes. Little Hachi stood at the side and asked curiously, Mistress, other than what you just said, is there anything else different about the palace of the illusory god? Tu Liwei laughed. Even if there is, it's not something your mistress can know now. The palace of the illusory god was full of forbidden places. Moreover, she had just entered, so how could she know so much? Suli had stayed there for so long, but she had not made any progress. But I did see a few oracles. Tu Liwei remembered what happened before. The others were fine, but the 8th oracles seemed to have a deep hatred for me. Xu Jing. Yes. Little Hachi coughed. That. I think I know. Tu Liwei looked at her in confusion. Little Hachi blinked innocently. It's just that I slapped her before. Who knew that she was still thinking about it? Tu Liwei was speechless. For a moment, even someone as eloquent as her didn't know what to say. Aunt 11 was very curious. Sister 8, didn't they say that the oracles are very powerful? You slapped her, but she didn't look for trouble with you? Little Hachi shrugged. She spoke rudely, so I had to teach her a lesson. As for looking for trouble with me, does your sister 8 look like someone who can be bullied easily? Aunt 11 shook her head seriously. Aunt 12 whispered, I remember Sister 8 said that only we can bully others, but we can't let others step on us. Little Hachi immediately went over and kissed Aunt 12 happily. Sister 12 is really smart. You still remember this? 12th Nyang blushed and felt a little embarrassed. But when she saw little Hachi's happy expression, she smiled too. I remember what Sister 8 said. Tu Liwei glanced at her faintly. Is this how a good memory is used? Of all things to remember, why do I have to remember this? No wonder Xu Jing was like that. No one would be able to tolerate this, right? However, there was something strange about this matter. Little Hachi, you gave her a slap and she let you go just like that? Xu Jing was not that kind of person. Little Hachi shrugged. Who knows? However, I saw that she seemed to have gotten herself into some trouble before, so I don't think she has the time or energy to think about it now. What's more, if she dares to take revenge, I'll immediately let everyone in the Illusion God Palace know that I slapped her. If this matter were to spread, Xu Jing wouldn't be able to stay in the Illusion God Palace anymore. Just the criticism and ridicule of everyone would be enough to drown her. Wu Yao followed behind them and shivered silently. He also mourned for Xu Jing for 3 seconds. Of all people to provoke, why did she have to provoke little Hachi? In the 13 Yu guards, other than Big Brother, the rest would take a detour when they saw little Hachi. Who would dare to provoke her? That Xu Jing was really too much. If she really couldn't handle it, she would have picked a soft persimmon. How unlucky. Tu Liwei thought for a while and said, it's better to be careful. Xu Jing would definitely take revenge for the smallest grievance. After being humiliated like this, she would definitely not let it go. For some reason, she hadn't made a move yet, but it didn't mean that she wouldn't do it in the future. Little Hachi tucked her hair behind her back and smiled charmingly. I know. However, the premise was that Xu Jing still had the ability. She couldn't even deal with the problem of the herb mountain, then how could she continue to be the 8th oracle? The group returned to their residence. Before they could enter the door, they saw Hua Shuangshuang walking over from another direction. Second brother. Wu Yao was the first to shout. Hua Shuangshuang looked up and was instantly delighted. 11th sister. 12th sister. Why are you here? Come and take a good look at me. Wu Yao was speechless. Hua Shuangshuang walked over quickly. He was very tall. Even though the two girls had grown up, they only reached his chest when they stood in front of him. Hua Shuangshuang bent down and patted their heads gently. It's been a long time since we last met. You've grown so tall. Aunt 11 and Aunt 12 were obviously very happy. They shouted in unison, "Hello, second brother." Aunt 11 looked over his shoulder. Second brother, what's this? Hua Shuangshuang tilted his shoulder slightly. Golden-winged raven-boned beast. I just picked it up a while ago. With a flap of its wings, the raven-boned beast flew onto Aunt 11's arm. Aunt 11 praised, "It's so beautiful." Sensing that Hua Shuangshuang was very close to Aunt 11, the raven-boned beast let down its guard and rubbed its head against the back of Aunt 11's hand. Aunt 12 looked envious. Sister, it seems to like you a lot. Aunt 11 stretched out her hand. Here. Aunt 12 quickly waved her hand and took a step back. I don't want it. The raven-boned beast looked a little fierce. She had always been a little afraid of it. Hua Shuangshuang laughed. 12th sister, look at this. As he spoke, he looked back and snapped his fingers. Come here. As soon as he finished speaking, a round furry little head popped out from behind the corner. Hua Shuangshuang waved his hand. That little thing was immediately encouraged and ran over to them. Its fur was white and golden and it had a pair of big black eyes. Its 4 hooves were pure black. It was a divine beast, Windstrider tiger. However, this Windstrider tiger was still very young. It looked like it was only a month old. Even though it tried its best to run over, its short legs were still not fast enough. Unexpectedly, it looked a little silly and adorable. Aunt 12's heart melted. Ah. She had no resistance to this kind of thing. The Windstrider tiger ran to Hua Shuangshuang's feet and rubbed against them intimately. Hua Shuangshuang clapped his hands and the Windstrider tiger jumped onto his hands. Its body was still very small, and it was not even as long as Hua Shuangshuang's forearm. Hua Shuangshuang handed the Windstrider tiger over. You're not afraid of this one, right? Aunt 12 nodded repeatedly and asked a little nervously. Second brother, can I really carry it? Hua Shuangshuang laughed. Of course. Aunt 12 stretched out her hands and carefully carried the little Windstrider tiger into her arms. The little thing was not afraid of strangers. It sniffed Aunt 12's body. It smelled sweet and fragrant and immediately lay down in her arms comfortably. Aunt 12 looked at it curiously and happily for a while. She could not help but ask. Second brother, did you pick this up too? It looks very small. Why didn't it follow its mother? Hua Shuangshuang nodded and frowned slightly. Yes, when I found it, its mother was already dead. Chapter 2371. Aunt 12 let out an ah as she looked at the wind-stepping tiger in her arms. Her heart ached. How could this be? Hua Shuangshuang paused and hesitated. After a moment, he didn't directly answer her question. I think it met with an accident. Still young, so I brought it back. He had always been close to all kinds of fiends and had raised countless of them over the years, so Aunt 12 and the others didn't mind. On the other hand, Chu Liyue took another look at the wind-stepping tiger and fell into deep thought. This was obviously a fiend from the Illusion God Palace. If he remembered correctly, all the fiends here were raised in the Divine Beast Mountain, and the second envoy Yu Qian was in charge. Of course, the Divine Beast Mountain was completely open. Anyone could go, but they couldn't take the fiends away. Unless the cultivator formed a contract with the fiends. It was expected that Hua Shuangshuang liked to go to the Divine Beast Mountain, but Chu Liyue really didn't expect that he would bring one back. From what he said, it seemed that there was more to it. Chu Liyue didn't ask in detail. He smiled and said, let's go in. Sun Yi and the others are also here. As soon as he entered the courtyard, he saw Sun Yi walking out of the house. When Aunt 11 and the others saw him, they were also very happy. Sun Yi's expression was also a little gentler. The group was very lively together. Chu Liyue looked around but didn't see Rong Xiu. Sun Yi saw this and immediately said, Master, His Highness Saint is in seclusion. Chu Liyue was stunned. She had known Rong Xiu for many years, but she rarely heard of him in seclusion. I understand. She looked at Wu Yao. Let's go in and talk. Mirror. In the room after hearing Wu Yao's statement, Chu Liyue's heart skipped a beat. Wu Yao nodded. Before we came, not only did the mirror not disappear, but it seemed to become clearer and more concrete as time passed. Chu Liyue's hand slowly clenched. Did anything appear on the mirror? For example, whose shadow? That's not true. Wu Yao shook his head. Yu Jiu and I have been guarding the mirror day and night, but the mirror is always shining brightly. It's hard to look at it directly, let alone see a human figure. Chu Liyue fell silent. For a moment he didn't know what to feel. It seemed like what she saw before wasn't an illusion. There was indeed a mirror in the Dao world. However, for some reason there was no sign of Rong Xiu or her in the mirror. But perhaps only when the two of them stood in front of the mirror would such a scene appear. Chu Liyue fell into deep thought. Every time she recalled the scene of that day, her heart would always feel faintly uneasy. The face reflected in the mirror was clearly the one she was most familiar with, but for some reason, it felt very unfamiliar. And Rong Xiu? Master? Master? After Wu Yao finished speaking, he saw that Chu Liyue didn't respond for a long time. He couldn't help but raise his voice and shout twice. Chu Liyue came back to his senses. Wu Yao looked at her expression and asked, Master, what do you think? How should we deal with this matter? Chu Liyue knocked on the table. Let's wait and see. Since Wu Yao and the others had already made the arrangements and nothing else had happened, they could be a little relieved for the time being. We'll report when there's another abnormality in the mirror. This matter was obviously not under their control, so the only thing they could do now was to wait. Wu Yao was a little surprised, but seeing that Chu Liyue had made up her mind, he also responded, yes. Chu Liyue came to the courtyard again and saw that Hua Shuangshuang and the others were still playing with the baby wind-stepping tiger in the courtyard. Shuangshuang, come here. Hearing this, Hua Shuangshuang immediately walked over. Master. Chu Liyue raised her chin. What's going on with the baby wind-stepping tiger? There was some hesitation on Hua Shuangshuang's face. After a while he explained, It's my fault. Chu Liyue looked at him. Hua Shuangshuang sighed. Some time ago I went to God Beast Mountain and saw a wind-stepping tiger with a cub. I liked it, so I stayed with it for a while. Later the wind-stepping tiger wanted to go with me, but I declined. Chu Liyue nodded. Of course, Hua Shuangshuang had her own considerations. It was obviously against the rules to casually bring out the demonic beasts of God Beast Mountain. If she was careless, it would cause trouble. When I went back later, I saw that the wind-stepping tiger had been killed. Chu Liyue's eyebrows twitched. Pulled by someone? Hua Shuangshuang nodded. Chu Liyue was silent for a moment. Except for the second oracle Yu Qian, there was no one else who dared to do this on God Beast Mountain. Why did he do this? He was in charge of God Beast Mountain. It was reasonable to say that these demonic beasts should follow his orders. He had no reason to do this. Maybe because... Hua Shuangshuang paused. In fact, I'm not very sure. But after the wind-stepping tiger died, all its teeth were pulled out. Chu Liyue knitted her brows tightly. You mean, the wind-stepping tiger might have bitten Yu Qian? Wait, there is indeed a scar on Yu Qian's hand. When she entered the palace of the illusory god, she said a few words to Yu Qian. At that time she inadvertently saw a few faint scars on Yu Qian's hand. But she didn't care at that time. Now that she thought about it, maybe it was really because of the wind-stepping tiger? Chu Liyue murmured in a low voice. But it shouldn't be. Isn't he in charge of God Beast Mountain? Why would the wind-stepping tiger attack him? Chapter 2372. Hua Shuangshuang sighed. When I went there again, I saw the real body of the wind-striding tiger. This little one was protected under its body and saved its life. I thought that it was still too young and it wasn't safe to stay there alone, so I brought it back. Such a cub wouldn't attract much attention even if it left the God Beast Mountain. Chu Liyue nodded. Let's raise it first. It just so happens that Aunt 12 and the others like it very much. Hua Shuangshuang paused and said, Master, what they like the most isn't actually magical beasts. Chu Liyue's eyelids twitched. At this moment she suddenly saw Tsun Yi take out 2 universe rings and hand them to Aunt 11 and Aunt 12. These are some pills that little Hachi refined previously. Take them first. The 2 girls obediently took them and thanked little Hachi. Thank you, Sister 8. Little Hachi, who was lying on the rattan chair, sat up with a look of surprise. It turned out that Big Brother didn't ask her for those pills just to force her to break through as soon as possible, but also for Aunt 11 and Aunt 12. His previous resentment instantly dissipated and Little 8 said with a smile, "Big Brother, you should have said so earlier." Sun E continued. "If you need anything in the future, just ask her for it." Little Hachi's smile froze. Although she had always taken care of Aunt 11 and Aunt 12, how could she afford to raise them all by herself? Even if she refined pills day and night, it wouldn't be enough. Aunt 12 looked at Sun E, then looked at Little Hachi. Finally, she gently tugged at Aunt 11's sleeve. "Sister, in this case, won't Sister 8 be very tired?" Aunt 11 nodded her head seriously and said, "Big Brother, Sister 8, don't worry. I heard that there's a mountain of herbs here. It's the same if we go there." Little Hachi immediately rejected. How can that be? Although there were a lot of heavenly treasures there, it would be inappropriate for his two younger sisters to eat them directly. She patted her chest. "Don't worry, Sister 8 will think of a way." Bang! At this moment a sound came from one of the houses. Immediately after, a rich medicinal fragrance spread out from within. Little Hachi's eyes lit up and she quickly stood up. The door opened and Jian Fengqi walked out with a jade box in his hand. His handsome face was filled with excitement. Success. After experiencing countless failures, he had finally crossed the threshold of being a senior doctor. Great. A tender and soft congratulatory voice could be heard. Jian Fengqi was stunned. He looked up and was stunned. Little Hachi had unknowingly appeared in front of him with a smile on her face. When she smiled, she was naturally extremely beautiful and charming. Her pair of watery eyes seemed to be able to speak, rippling with light. However, Jian Fengqi could not see her beauty at all. He could only remember the tragic memories of being constantly attacked and being kicked in the foot. Therefore, he subconsciously took a step back. "What are you doing?" Little Hachi blinked. "Nothing, I'm just happy for you that you've broken through to senior doctor." Jian Fengqi narrowed his eyes warily. He did not dare to believe Little Hachi's words now. Little Hachi turned around and waved. "Sister 11, Sister 12. Come over quickly." Only then did Jian Fengqi see that there were actually two more girls in the courtyard. Aunt 11, Aunt 12? Seeing those familiar yet unfamiliar faces, Jian Fengqi was instantly happy. In his memory, these two were still young girls. In the blink of an eye, they were already slender and elegant. Aunt 11 pulled Aunt 12 over. "Brother Fengqi." This greeting really made Jian Fengqi burst with joy. "You two are here too?" Little Hachi looked at the two and smiled. "Look, your brother Fengqi is now a senior doctor. If you're hungry in the future, come to him. He has a lot of stock here." Jian Fengqi's heart sank. "W8, what do you mean by this?" At this moment he suddenly remembered the old stories about these two girls. They already had a huge appetite a few years ago, but now, Jian Fengqi's mouth twitched harshly. "Don't be anxious. Hurry up and thank Brother Fengqi." Little Hachi urged with a grin. Aunt 11 immediately said, "Thank you, Brother Fengqi." Aunt 12 also whispered, thank you, Brother Fengqi." Jian Fengqi was speechless. How can I resist now that things have come to this? I seem to have been cheated. Chu Luiyue looked at him sympathetically. How great is it to break through to senior doctor? In the end, before he could celebrate, Little Hachi and the rest had already taken advantage of him. Yes, there should be a lot more to come. Jian Fengqi seemed to sense Chu Luiyue's gaze and looked over with difficulty. Chu Luiyue gave him a thumbs up. "Fengqi is really generous. I'm impressed." Jian Fengqi was speechless. Is it too late to go back and pretend that I haven't broken through? At this moment the void suddenly fluctuated. Immediately after, a figure fell from it. Jian Fengqi was quick to react as he immediately went forward and hugged her. This had happened many times recently and he had already practiced it. Mu Hongyu closed her eyes and waited for the fall. However, after waiting for a while, the expected pain didn't come. Instead it seemed like, something doesn't seem right? She suddenly opened her eyes and bumped into Jian Fengqi's smug face. "Hongyu, your skills have improved recently. You can always land in my arms so accurately." Mu Hongyu expressionlessly retracted her fist and jumped down. "Isn't this more accurate?" She said she would hit the left eye, but she definitely wouldn't hit the right eye. Jian Fengqi was heartbroken. You heartless person." Mu Hongyu clapped her hands. You're too weak. You dodge so slowly. If I don't hit you, who should I hit? Jian Fengqi choked. Aunt 11 looked at Mu Hongyu, then at Jian Fengqi. Brother Fengqi, is this sister-in-law? Mu Hongyu was speechless. This young lady is so pretty, but why is her eyesight so bad? Almost. Jian Fengqi immediately replied. Mu Hongyu rolled her eyes at him. Just as she was about to retort, Jian Fengqi took out a piece of paper from somewhere. Sai, I don't think this is the contract. He rubbed his palm and the piece of paper turned into powder. Mu Hongyu, I'll endure it. She turned and walked towards Chu Liyue. Swoosh. Jian Fengqi flapped his folding fan, covering half of his dark eye, and winked at Aunt 11. Not bad. Aunt 11 gestured a number. 10 Master Physician pills. Chapter 2373. Jian Fengqi's forehead twitched. This is robbery. He shook his head. No, I can only give you 5 at most. Aunt 11 squinted at him. She and her sister couldn't even split them. This is too stingy. She extended her second finger expressionlessly. 20. Jian Fengqi's fingers trembled and his heart bled. Aunt 11, why are you becoming more and more like your master? Not to mention other things, this blackmail skill was really amazing. Aunt 11 raised her eyebrows. Aunt 12 was very envious and whispered. Sister, Brother Fengqi is praising you. Aunt 11, I heard. Jian Fengqi? Aunt 12 sighed. She also knew that she was too soft and couldn't even learn 1/10 of her master's skills. She couldn't compare to her sister, who was always clean and straightforward. Therefore she had always admired her sister for coming here. I can't. You'll be fine as long as you stay by master's side in the future. Aunt 11 consoled. Aunt 12 nodded vigorously. Okay. Aunt 11 raised her chin. Aunt 12 mustered her courage, extended her hand and stammered. 30. Jian Fengqi, I can't live like this. He gritted his teeth. 20. I can't give more. Deal. Aunt 11 stopped, satisfied. Jian Fengqi felt a little stuffy in his chest and he pounded it a few times before he could breathe again. On the other side, Mu Hongyu had already arrived in front of Chu Liyue. Her eyes were filled with excitement. Seeing this, Chu Liyue vaguely guessed something. Mu Hongyu lowered her voice. Liyu, I left the heavenly gate today. Chu Liyue's heart skipped a beat. Although I wasted a lot of time and effort in the middle, I finally succeeded. And I shouldn't have been discovered. Mu Hongyu was also very excited. During this period she had been studying the Mahayana realm, but unfortunately because there was no one to guide her, her progress was slow. Helpless, she could only try again and again. She couldn't even remember how many times she had failed. But he finally succeeded. Chu Liyue took her hand and walked to the side. Does anyone else know about this? Mu Hongyu shook her head. I've already checked before. The person in charge of guarding the gate of heaven is the 11th divine envoy, Qiu Tong. However, his strength is not as strong as the 7th divine envoy, Jin Yunlai. His control over the gate of heaven is also much weaker. It's not difficult to avoid him. Her almond eyes sparkled. Liyu, now that we're out of the heavenly gate, I'll definitely be able to enter the illusionary god ocean and find master after some time. Chu Liyue stared at her. Perhaps it was because she had failed countless times during this period of time, but there were many scars on Mu Hongyu's face and body. However, she had never said that she would give up and had persevered until now. Chu Liyue gently exhaled. Hongyu, thank you. Mu Hongyu shook her head. What kind of relationship do we have? You're treating me like an outsider. Moreover, I also want to save master as soon as possible. This is what I should do. The illusionary god ocean was dangerous and treacherous. Fifth Xianxia was trapped in it and suffered much more pain than she did. Therefore she didn't dare to relax for a moment. Her mind was filled with this matter. Chu Liyue's lips curled up and his gaze was fixed. That day won't be far away. That's right. Mu Hongyu suddenly thought of something. The 9th and 10th divine envoys seemed to be imprisoned in the illusionary god ocean as well. What? Chu Liyue was shocked. How is that possible? Are you sure? Didn't we see those two before? I won't be wrong. It's them. However, they're imprisoned in different places from masters. I wanted to investigate carefully, but I was worried that I would be discovered if I was out for too long, so I hurried back. Mu Hongyu was confused. I don't know why they're imprisoned. Chu Liyue fell silent. Most people in the illusionary god palace obviously didn't know about this. The only person who could imprison them in the illusionary god ocean was the divine lord or the first divine envoy. According to Nanjing Shu, the two divine envoys had gone to the god-slaying tomb on the orders of the first divine envoy. In that case, there was an 80 to 90% chance that this matter was the work of that person. Was it because they couldn't get the music score? But at that time in the god-slaying tomb they weren't even there. When Chu Luiyue arrived at the tomb of the god, the two divine envoys were already gone. Now that he thought about it, he was still confused. Chu Luiyue thought for a moment and said, "Since no one knows about this, let's keep it a secret." Mu Hongyu nodded. "I know." As she spoke, she asked curiously, "What's the matter?" "Luyu, I heard that you've entered the palace of the illusionary god?" Chu Luiyue smiled. "Why are you all so curious about the palace of the illusionary god?" "Of course. All the cultivators in the palace of the illusionary god want to go in." Mu Hongyu rubbed her nose. "By the way, I heard from Lord Ji that I'll be qualified to enter the palace of the illusionary god after reaching the Mahayana realm." Chu Luiyue also knew about this. The palace of the illusionary god was powerful and sacred. All the cultivators wanted to go in and have a look. Other than the divine envoys, the other cultivators had several ways to get in. The first way was to comprehend all the Xian arrays on the star path like Chu Luiyue and enter from the front door. The second way was to become a refiner saint and get a trace of energy from the chaotic sacred jade to enter. The third way was to become a medical saint. This was also very difficult. Xu Jing was the only medical saint in the entire illusionary god palace. In the past 10,000 years, no one had broken through to become a medical saint. Of course, this was related to Xu Jing's strict supervision of the herb mountain. Her rules made many celestial physicians unable to fully explore their talents and potential. Although they were free now, it was very difficult for anyone to break through in a short period of time. Originally, Liang He was very popular. Unfortunately, he suffered a series of setbacks recently and was unable to recover. It had been a long time since he appeared in front of everyone. There was only half a year left before the heavenly gate closed. It was impossible for him to cross the threshold of a medical saint. The most special one was Mu Hongyu. As long as she broke through the Mahayana realm, she could enter the palace of the illusionary god. But for those cultivators who had the same constitution as her, not to mention the Mahayana realm, many of them couldn't even break through the minor realization realm. Therefore, this path wasn't easy to walk. The remaining cultivators had no way to enter the palace of the illusionary god in advance. Their only chance was to ascend to the heavens and become a god in half a year. This success rate was higher than the previous ones. Of course, this was relative. Most people could only stay outside forever. Chapter 2374. Jinbao Pavilion. Zhao rushed back quickly. Because most people were attracted by the commotion on the star path, there were not many guests in Jinbao Pavilion today. After he came back, he locked the door and went up to the second floor, heading straight for the room at the end of the corridor. Yan Gu was standing by the window with his hands behind his back. Second master. Hearing the commotion, Yan Gu turned around with a proud smile on his face. "You're back." Looking at his expression, Zhao knew that he must have known everything that happened on Chu Liuyue's side. But this was normal. After such a big commotion, it was hard not to know. Madame entered the palace of the illusory god. After a while she went out again. It seems that a few of her subordinates came. Mingshu told him the truth. Also, Xiao Ran was inspired by Madame and is trying to crack the last Xian formation. If nothing goes wrong, he should succeed this time. Zhao was also surprised by this. He stroked his beard and sighed. That's hard to come by. Xiao Ran has been stuck on this for too long. He had a good relationship with Xiao Ran, so he was naturally happy to hear this news. Mingshu paused and asked. "Second master, Madame said that when you get better she wants to visit you personally." Yan Gu waved his hand. No. Just say that I'm bedridden and seriously ill." Anyway, he could not meet her now. Before his master gave the order, he did not dare to make a decision. "Zhao. Then are you going to keep hiding like this?" How many times had he said this? Madame clearly did not intend to give up and insisted on meeting him at least once. Yan Gu also had a headache. He rubbed his temples. "Wait for master's news." "Yes." Dumpling was sent to the boundary by Yu Qian. She stopped in her tracks. "I'm here. Can you leave now?" She felt really uncomfortable staying with this person. Yu Qian did not care about Dumpling's disgust. Anyway, she just needed to cultivate properly and open her meridians as soon as possible. Yu Qian looked down at her condescendingly. His voice was as gentle as ever, but the words he said were extremely domineering. Before you open your 8th meridian, you cannot cross this barrier and enter the palace of the illusory god. What? Dumpling frowned. I don't agree. I don't want to. How did she know when he would be able to open his 8th meridian? If it didn't open in 10 years, didn't that mean she wouldn't be able to come for 10 years? That's not what you said earlier. I've changed my mind. Yu Qian smiled. If Chu Liwei hadn't come in, it wouldn't have mattered if Dumpling had come in. But now, no. Even though there was no contract between the two of them, Tuanzi had grown up by Chu Liu's side and was very dependent on her. If things continued like today, then the bond between her and Dumpling would never be completely removed. Therefore it was better to cut the Gordian knot. If you don't want her to be bullied in the palace of the illusory god, it's best if you can break through as soon as possible. Yu Qian's words were already an undisguised threat. Dumpling gritted her teeth, her small face flushed red with anger, and her eyes instantly burned with golden flames. However, Yu Qian didn't seem to care. The current Dumpling was still not his match. After a long confrontation, Dumpling finally gritted her teeth and said, "All right. Just you wait. Sooner or later she would settle the old and new grudges with these people." With that, she tiptoed and headed straight for Fengming Mountain. A resplendent light flashed past, and her figure disappeared behind the barrier in the blink of an eye. Yu Qian stood there for a while before turning around and leaving. Dumpling returned to Fengming Mountain with a belly full of anger. When she arrived at the top of the mountain, she took out her ancestor's golden feather and gently brushed it with her small hand. "Grandpa Patriarch, don't worry, I won't be bullied by them forever." A faint light flashed across the ancestor's golden feather. Dumpling carefully put it away and decided to turn her anger into motivation. If he didn't want her to go, then she wouldn't go. Anyway, you could come over. However, she didn't know if that black shadow would come and peek at her again after today. After sitting there for a while, Dumpling put away her thoughts and began to cultivate again. Chu Liwei originally wanted to see Rong Xiao and discuss some things with him. Unfortunately, he was in seclusion and she didn't know how long it would take for him to come out. She didn't continue to wait and returned to the palace of the illusory god after dealing with the matters here. At this time, Xiao Ran's profound formation had already completed one of 3 parts. There were still a lot of onlookers. However, when Chu Liwei came again, she found that Mu Yaofeng's figure seemed to have disappeared. She thought for a moment and a faint smile flashed across her lips, but it disappeared in an instant. Then she entered the palace of the illusory god. Chu Liwei walked alone to her residence. When she passed by the 7th divine emissary's courtyard, she stopped and looked over. However, she wasn't looking at Jin Yunlai. The first divine emissary lived in a remote and quiet place, obviously not wanting to be disturbed. Although Chu Liwei was curious, she knew that this wasn't the time to go over. Even the other divine emissaries found it difficult to meet him, let alone her. At this moment, a gaze fell on her. Chu Liwei looked over and nodded slightly at Jin Yunlai, who had just walked out. He didn't come out but stood on the steps and looked over. Chu Liwei smiled and turned to leave. Jin Yunlai frowned slightly. Chu Liwei didn't seem to be coming for him just now. After thinking for a moment, he turned his head and pondered. Was Chu Liwei looking at the first divine emissary just now? Chapter 2375. In the following period of time, Chu Liwei stayed alone in his courtyard, cultivating quietly and never went out again. However, outside it was getting more and more lively. Herb Mountain. Little Hachi brought Aunt 11 and Aunt 12 here, planning to choose more herbs to make some snacks for the 2 girls. It was the first time the 2 girls came here, so they were naturally very curious and excited, looking around from time to time. There were also many people looking at them. Little Hachi was already eye-catching enough by herself, and now with the addition of the beautiful twins, they easily stole everyone's attention. Sister 8, there are so many people here. Aunt 12 had always been afraid of strangers, and now that there were many people looking at them, she was even more shy and subconsciously hid behind Aunt 12. There seemed to be more people than before. Little Hachi nodded in agreement. She had been here many times before, but she had never seen so many people at the same time. There were shadows flashing on almost every mountain, and there were more than one or two. Someone beside her heard her words and couldn't help but explain. Miss Little Hatchie, there's only half a year left before the divine gate closes, so of course everyone is nervous. Little Hatchie turned her head to look, and the person who spoke was a young man. She blinked and smiled. Oh, right, I almost forgot about that. There was a saying in the illusory god palace that the divine gate would close in half a year, and those who couldn't enter the illusory god palace before then would have to wait for the next opportunity. And the next time they would have to wait for tens of thousands of years. Such a long time was really unbearable. So many people worked hard hoping to successfully enter the illusory god palace before then. For a celestial doctor, they had to break through to the medical saint level to obtain this qualification. It was easy to say but difficult to do. The difficulty of this was no less than the star path of a mystic master. However, cramming at the last minute doesn't seem to be very useful, right? Little Hatchie was a little disapproving. The young man suddenly felt a little embarrassed. Although that's the case, if you work harder you can always have more hope, right? Number 8 shrugged and curled the corners of his lips. Although I don't really care about it, thank you anyway. The young man's face reddened slightly. Little Hatchie looked at the two girls beside her. Let's go. Just as he took a step forward, the young man spoke again. Miss Little Hatchie, please wait. Little Hatchie paused and turned around. Is there anything else? Actually, it's nothing important. It's just that. I heard that Little Hatchie already has someone she likes. The young man asked carefully. He stared at Little Hatchie without blinking, afraid that he would miss something. As soon as this was said, many people around immediately pricked up their ears. There had long been rumors that Little Hatchie had firmly rejected Liang He because she already had someone she liked. Moreover, that person had also come up from the Divine Ruins world and was currently in the illusory god palace. Unfortunately, that person didn't seem to come out much, so no one had seen him before. Over time, some people began to have doubts about this matter. Now that someone had asked, everyone was naturally very concerned. Aunt 11 and Aunt 12 immediately looked at Little Hatchie with bright eyes. She had Sister 8's husband? Why hadn't they heard Sister 8 mention it before? According to Sister 8's personality, it shouldn't be. Little Hatchie bent her finger and gently tapped on their foreheads. After not seeing each other for a few years, her gossipy heart was still the same. She tucked her hair behind her ear and smiled. Yes, what's wrong? Hearing her affirmative answer, many people revealed disappointed expressions. The young man's expression also froze. After a while he replied awkwardly. To be able to make Little Hatchie fall in love with someone like that, he must be very outstanding, right? Otherwise, why would she give up on Liang He? Little Hatchie's beautiful eyes narrowed slightly. This seems like he's trying to get some information out of me. However, she didn't mind. She didn't even hesitate to reject Liang He, let alone these people. Originally, she pulled Yanqing in to avoid these troubles. Thinking of this, she nodded with a smile. Yes. Seeing that Little Hatchie wasn't willing to reveal too much, there were still people who didn't give up and asked. I've always heard of this person, but no one has seen him before. Little Hatchie, even if your sweetheart has a shy personality, it's strange that he hasn't come out after being in the Illusion God Palace for so long, right? Once this was said, it immediately attracted the approval of many people. Ever since Liang He returned, they were very curious about that person. It was a pity that he didn't even come out of the courtyard, so it was really difficult to meet him. Now that someone finally asked, everyone naturally wanted to hear it. Little Hatchie crossed her arms and said lazily, he doesn't like to come out, so naturally he doesn't come out. What's so strange about that? Although that was what she said, Little Hatchie actually had the same question in her heart. Logically speaking, Yanqing's talent wasn't bad, and he also had the bloodline totem of the Yuntian Tower. Even in the Illusion God Palace where geniuses gathered, he would be one of the best. However, he didn't seem to have any interest in these things. Most of the time he stayed in the courtyard and didn't come out. Even when he went out occasionally, not many people seemed to have seen him. However, she didn't plan to discuss these questions with these outsiders. Many people looked at each other. After a while, someone couldn't help but ask, Miss Little Hatchie, this person can't be hiding something, right? Little Hatchie's beautiful eyes were instantly dyed with a layer of coldness. She sneered, our family's brother Yanqing is extraordinarily handsome and talented. How can you casually slander him? As soon as he finished speaking, he heard a sharp female voice. Who are you talking about? Chapter 2376. Little Hachi was annoyed when she heard this voice. She turned around and saw an annoying face. Why was this Xu Jing haunting her like a ghost? Little Hachi's gaze lingered on her face for a moment, and her red lips curved into a perfect arc. Eighth Oracle, I haven't seen you in a few days. Your complexion seems to be much better than before. Xu Jing's chest felt stifled. How could she not hear the ridicule in her voice? But in front of so many people she couldn't refute anything. Little Hachi had always been unpredictable. Who knew if she would directly reveal what happened that day? Moreover, she didn't care about this person right now. Whether my complexion is good or bad has nothing to do with you. Answer my question. Whose name did you just call? Once again, Xu Jing brought out her prestige as the 8th divine envoy and used her status to suppress Little 8. Little Hachi blinked. Strange, why did it seem like Xu Jing cared about what she said just now? She chuckled softly and enunciated each word clearly. I was talking about my family's older brother Yan Qing. Why does the 8th oracle care so much about my personal matters? Hearing the words Yan Qing, Xu Jing's heart skipped a beat. But then she felt that she was overthinking it. Must be someone with the same name. She had heard some news about Little Hachi's so-called sweetheart before. If he remembered correctly, that person had come up from the Divine Ruins realm and was only a god. How could this person be the same person as that person? It's nothing. I just feel that his name might need to be changed. Little Hachi was immediately unhappy. People could be called whatever they wanted. How could she say that someone's name wasn't good and ask them to change their name? Why, what does my family's older brother Yan Qing's name have to do with the 8th oracle? Seeing Xu Jing's arrogant and displeased expression, Little Hachi felt even angrier. However, Xu Jing suddenly smiled, but there was no smile in his eyes. I'm doing this for the good of you and him. You should know that not everyone can use the name Yan Qing. Liking her or not is a small matter, but offending the left divine general of the emperor is not a small sin. Little Hachi was stunned. Left divine general? Who was this? She didn't seem to have heard of him before. However, after hearing Xu Jing's words, the crowd was in an uproar. So Yan Qing is the name of the left divine general? This is the first time I've heard of it. Me too. The two divine generals rarely appeared in public and had always been extremely mysterious. Very few people even knew their names. I didn't expect the 8th divine emissary to say it out loud today. Isn't this also a coincidence? Coincidentally, I met someone with the same name as the divine general of the left. This matter has to be handled carefully. After all, that is the divine general of the left. Little Hachi frowned. She had never heard of the left divine general, but she knew how powerful the emperor was. She had heard that even the divine lord of the illusion god palace had to be respectful to the emperor. Then the people around him shouldn't be provoked. Especially the title of the left divine general. It didn't sound simple. Xu Jing looked arrogant and said lightly. If he still wants to stay in the illusion god palace, he better change his name. Little Hachi narrowed her eyes and laughed. Who is the left divine general? Why would he care about such a small matter? 8th divine emissary, I think you shouldn't measure the heart of a gentleman with the yardstick of a villain. Xu Jing's expression changed. Actually, with her understanding of the emperor, he wasn't someone who would care about such things. She just felt uncomfortable when she heard Little Hachi yelling at him, so she came up with such an excuse. But she didn't expect Little Hachi to not care at all. Little Hachi's slender waist turned slightly and she turned around. 11th sister, 12th sister, let's go. If you like anything, just tell Sister 8. The two girls nodded. Thank you, Sister 8. Seeing that the three of them were about to leave, Xu Jing asked in disbelief. Wait, you're leaving just like that? Little Hachi turned around in surprise. What else? The corners of her lips curled up and her eyes twinkled. After I'm done here, I still have to go back to see Brother Yan Qing. Oh right, I don't think the 8th divine emissary understands the feeling of not seeing each other for 3 years. I won't say too much to you. After saying that, the three of them walked briskly toward a mountain peak, ignoring Xu Jing. Xu Jing was angry and the onlookers were also sad. It seemed that Little Hachi and that Yan Qing had a good relationship. Then they probably didn't have a chance. After staring at Little Hachi and the others for a while, Xu Jing turned around and left. Illusory God Palace. In the room, Chu Liyue was sitting quietly. After circulating her divine power for one cycle, she slowly opened her eyes. The elemental energy here was indeed incomparable to the outside world. She had only stayed here for a short period of time, but she could clearly feel that her aura had improved. The most important thing was that the situation here wasn't like the one in the Red Moon Desert, where the elemental energy kept pouring into the cultivator's body, causing the cultivator to explode and die. Everything here seemed to be operating in a very orderly and calm manner. She stood up and was about to pour a cup of tea when she suddenly felt a gaze on her. She narrowed her eyes. That was an extremely familiar aura. The next moment she moved her wrist and a stream of divine power flew out. Who is it? Digression. Some people were waiting for her return while others watched her leave. And the pitiful February was still waiting for the monthly ticket. Tomorrow afternoon there would be a little more. Then the godly doctor would be serialized for 1 year and 5 months. This might be the last full month for the godly doctor. Unfortunately, the godly doctor had never entered the top 10 monthly ticket sales. Perhaps there wouldn't be such a chance in the future. Therefore, she hoped that the readers of the godly doctor would save the monthly ticket for her this time. Chapter 2377. That gaze instantly disappeared. Chu Liwei hurriedly walked out and looked in the direction of the gaze she felt. It was empty. She frowned slightly. Her feeling just now was definitely not wrong. Someone was indeed looking at her and it was extremely familiar. Unfortunately, the other party left too quickly, and she didn't have time to carefully identify who it was. In the palace of the illusory god she was most familiar with Su Li. Other than that there was also Jun Jiuqing and Nan Jinshu. Perhaps Jin Yunlai and Yu Qian could also be considered. But it didn't seem to be them. Moreover, these people didn't seem to have the need to do this. If they wanted to see her they could just come and see her directly. Why did they have to do this? Chu Liwei wanted to return to her room, but after thinking carefully she still walked outside. The palace of the illusory god was very large, and the roads were winding and complicated. It was easy to get lost walking in it. But Chu Liwei didn't seem to have such worries. She just followed the path and walked forward casually, looking around as she walked. The surroundings were very quiet. Thinking about it, in the palace of the illusory god, there were very few people who could enter except for the divine envoys. Moreover, this place was so big that they were basically scattered. Previously in the Red Moon Desert, she only saw a corner of the palace of the illusory god through the illusion. Now that she was inside she saw many things she had never seen before and naturally felt different. The ground under her feet was paved with lapis lazuli, and she walked on it silently. Unfortunately, after that gaze disappeared there was no trace of it. Chu Liwei looked around but still didn't find anything. She stopped at the corner of a courtyard and sighed softly. In other people's territory she probably couldn't snatch it. She shook her head and decided to put this matter aside for now. However, just as she turned around, a gust of wind blew, and a faint fragrance instantly spread in the air. Chu Liwei was stunned. This fragrance was the fragrance of peach blossoms? She murmured softly, feeling a little strange in her heart. This aura seemed to be coming from behind her. She half turned around. At the end of this road was a wall. She raised her head slightly, wanting to see the scenery behind the wall. Suddenly, a pink and white peach blossom drifted over with the wind. Chu Liwei raised his hand to catch it. She took a closer look and was stunned. This peach blossom bloomed just right, but there were a few pieces of sparkling and translucent ice crystals on the petals. She subconsciously raised her hand and touched the peach blossom hairpin on her head. This seems quite similar. The ice crystals contained a chill. Even after falling on the petals for a long time they did not melt. Chu Liwei was curious and wanted to go over to take a look. "What are you doing here?" A questioning voice came from behind. Chu Liwei paused and looked back. It was Yu Qian. Unlike his usual gentle expression at this moment, there was no expression on his face. Even the corners of his eyes and the tips of his brows were cold. There was even a hint of anger in his voice. Obviously he was very dissatisfied with Chu Liui's behavior. Chu Liwei calmly put away the peach blossom in her hand and smiled. "I was a little bored alone, so I wanted to come out for a walk. Unknowingly I came here." She looked left and right. "This doesn't seem to be the residence of the divine envoys, right? You can't come here either?" Yu Qian said coldly. "This is one of the forbidden areas of the illusory god palace. No one is allowed to come close. Oh, Chu Liwei revealed a look of realization and immediately followed the good advice. Then I'm sorry I came to the wrong place. Second Divine Envoy, don't worry, I'll leave now. With that, she really prepared to leave without any reluctance. When she passed by Yu Qian suddenly spoke. Wait. Second Divine Envoy, is there anything else? Yu Qian looked down at her condescendingly, his eyes full of pressure. Just now. You came here by yourself? Chu Liwei smiled. Yes, what else could it be? Could it be? Or did someone bring me here on purpose? Yu Qian was the first to deny this possibility in his heart. Not to mention others, even he didn't come to this place very often. On one hand, this place was very remote. If he wanted to come here, he would have to take a lot of detours, which was very troublesome. On the other hand, this was a forbidden area and there was nothing to see here. Even though he found it unbelievable that Chu Liwei could find this place purely by herself, he really couldn't think of anyone who would purposely lead her here after thinking about it. Therefore, he could only choose to believe Chu Liu's words. Yu Qian nodded. Scope. Don't come again in the future. Chu Liwei raised her eyebrows slightly, smiled in response, and then left as if nothing had happened. Soon only Yu Qian was left. He stared at the wall for a long time. Chu Liwei returned to her residence with familiarity. After entering the room, she stretched out her hand and took out the peach blossom. Suddenly, her expression froze. The peach blossom that was in full bloom earlier had completely changed its appearance. The few ice crystals on it had already melted, and the pinkish-white petals were soaked in water. The layer of color on the surface had faded, revealing a bright gold wrapped inside. Gold? Chu Liwei was stunned. She had never seen a golden peach blossom before. This was obviously not real. It looked more like it was carved out of special materials. She stretched out her finger and gently rubbed the petals twice. A touch of darkness appeared. This is actually a peach blossom that's intertwined with gold and darkness? Chapter 2378. This was indeed not a real peach blossom, but Chu Liwei stared at it for a long time, but she still couldn't tell what it was made of. After wiping away the faint layer of pinkish-white on the outside, the inside was a brilliant gold and a deep black. These two extremely contrasting colors intertwined with each other. She placed the peach blossom in her hand and when the wind blew, it turned into powder and disappeared. Chu Liwei stared at it in a daze and she suddenly felt a sense of loss. She raised her eyes and looked outside. Who else is watching me in the dark in the palace of the illusory god? And what's behind that wall? At this moment, Little Hachi brought Aunt 11 and Aunt 12 to sweep through a few mountain ranges before leaving in satisfaction. Back in the courtyard, Little 8's lips curled into a smile. Go and send the things to your brother Fengqi. Aunt 11 responded and pulled Aunt 12 to find Jian Fengqi. A moment later, a scream was heard from the room. So many. After a while, Aunt 11 and Aunt 12 walked out of the room and nodded at Little Hachi. Sister 8, Brother Fengqi has already agreed to help you refine it. Little Hachi blinked. Is it because of Little Red Fish? The two girls nodded. Little Hachi clicked her tongue. I didn't expect that the young Master Jian, who was untouched by 1,000 flowers back then, would be eaten to death by others. As she spoke, she walked forward in small steps. Aunt 11 looked behind her and suddenly shouted. Sister 8's husband. Yan Qing, who had just walked out of the room, paused in his footsteps. His usually cold and handsome face had a rare look of astonishment. He almost instinctively looked at Little Hachi beside him. When Little Hachi heard this, she stumbled and almost fell to the ground. She pursed her lips and turned around to look at Aunt 11. From the corner of her eye, she saw Yan Qing standing by the door. The way he looked at me. Little Hachi felt a little embarrassed and hurriedly said, 11th sister, don't shout. He's not Sister 8's husband. It was one thing to deceive outsiders, but how could one's own family misunderstand? He could only blame himself for leaving in such a hurry that he forgot to explain this matter to the two ladies. In the end, they ended up in such an awkward situation. However, Little Hachi did not expect that an even more embarrassing scene awaited her. This was because 12 Madam had spoken. She looked at Xiao Ba with a blank expression, then looked at Yan Qing and said in a soft voice, But, Sister 8, didn't you just say that Sister 8's husband is extraordinarily handsome and talented? Isn't he someone that others can compare to? Although her voice was soft, it was quiet in the courtyard. Everyone present could hear her clearly. Little Hachi clutched her chest and almost passed out. 12th sister. Sometimes it's not entirely a good thing that you have a good memory. Even if you wanted to say it, you didn't have to repeat every word so accurately. Little Hachi wanted to be like how she used to be. She wanted to casually joke around and tease her a little to cover up the matter. However, her heart was beating wildly and she could not say a single word. Every time she wanted to open her mouth, the scene of Yanqing bending over and squatting in front of her to help her put on her shoes appeared in her mind. Her face burned up again and she felt unbearably hot. She had never had a moment like this where she wanted to find a hole in the ground to drill. I was just saying that. Actually, Yanqing and I. Wu Yao, who had just returned from a stroll outside, heard these words just as he walked to the entrance of the courtyard. He was stunned and then frowned. Little Hachi, why haven't I heard you mention this before? Little Hachi and Yanqing were dating? Why didn't he know anything about it? Could it be that they had been together for the past few months in the Illusion God Palace? Do Big Brother and the others know? Little Hachi said with difficulty. 5th brother, misunderstood, Wu Yao said disapprovingly. You should have told us clearly about this matter first. That way everyone can help you check, right? What if you meet someone who isn't virtuous? Wu Yao didn't think about it at all. It had always been little 8 who made others sad. She had never been the one to be hurt. Yanqing's 10,000-year-old iceberg face finally cracked. He was about to speak when Wu Yao looked over. His eyes were full of scrutiny and criticism. He looked at Yanqing from top to bottom, from left to right and from inside out several times. Appearance? Well, not bad. Figure? Well, not bad. Strength? Well, barely. After looking at him for a long time, Wu Yao realized that he actually couldn't find any big problems. So he finally said mercifully. Originally, the 13th Yu sect had very high requirements for Little Hachi's future husband. However, since Little Hachi likes you, we can still lower the standards appropriately. After all, her own feelings are the most important. However, Little Hachi has been spoiled and can't bear to be wronged. You have to take good care of her in the future. If I find out that you made her unhappy in the slightest. Little Hachi was completely desperate. She twisted her stiff neck and looked around. Aunt 11 asked, Sister 8, what are you looking for? Little Hachi. Looking for a hoe? She could dig a hole in the ground herself. Anyway, she couldn't stay here anymore. Aunt 11. Little Hachi helplessly pulled Wu Yao's arm weakly. 5th brother. 5th brother. Stop it. If he continued, she really couldn't face Yanqing in the future. Wu Yao glared at her and gave her a look. What are you doing? Yanqing, this brat, secretly took away their Little Hachi. He couldn't wait to be angry. Shouldn't he say a few more words and educate him? I won't make her unhappy. A clear and cold voice suddenly sounded. Little Hachi was stunned and looked up in surprise. Yanqing said, I won't let her be wronged. Chapter 2379. Little Hachi was extremely surprised. Her beautiful eyes widened slightly, and she almost suspected that she had misheard. However, Yanqing's expression was as usual and she really couldn't tell anything from it. If she hadn't heard it with her own ears, it was really hard to imagine that a person like him would actually say such things. As if sensing her gaze, Yanqing turned his eyes slightly and looked over. The two of them looked at each other and Little Hachi's heart instantly tightened. It was probably because this scene was too overwhelming that they were at a loss of what to do. That was why they were acting this way. Fortunately, Yanqing quickly looked away. The subtle sense of oppression instantly disappeared. After listening to Yanqing's answer, Wu Yao reluctantly nodded his head in satisfaction. That's more like it. Then he looked at Little Hachi and reminded her. Little Hachi, in the future you and Yanqing. Little Hachi glanced at him sadly and said faintly, 5th brother, you can leave if you're done. Wu Yao shuddered and coughed. Cough, in that case I won't say anything more. You can do as you see fit. After saying that, he was finally willing to leave. Aunt 11 tugged at Aunt 12. Sister, let's go. Aunt 12 was still a little hesitant, but, Sister 8 and Sister 8's husband must have something to say. Why are we still staying here? Aunt 12 suddenly understood. Whisper. Aunt 11's expression showed that she was a promising child. Little Hachi's forehead twitched violently. You too. Goodbye, Sister 8. Goodbye, Sister 8's husband. Aunt Four's eyes were sharp and she immediately pulled them away. Only little Hachi, who was flustered in the wind, was left behind. In fact, she also wanted to disappear immediately. But things had turned out like this and it didn't seem good to just leave like this. She lowered her head, took a deep breath and walked toward Yanqing. Lady Yanqing, I'm really sorry, little Hachi said hesitantly. She didn't dare to look at Yanqing. My 5th brother, 11th sister and 12th sister have just arrived. They don't know what happened between us, so they misunderstood. Please don't take it to heart. Yanqing nodded with an indifferent expression. I know. Little Hachi quickly looked up and glanced at Yanqing. Probably, maybe, Yanqing just didn't want her to be too embarrassed, so she said that sentence. Don't worry, I'll explain it to them later. Yanqing's thin lips moved slightly. The words were on the tip of her tongue, but she changed them. Yes. Seeing that Yanqing really didn't take this matter to heart, little Hachi breathed a sigh of relief in her heart, but inexplicably felt a little disappointed. However, this feeling was quickly dispelled by her. She turned around and was about to leave. Suddenly, she thought of something and looked back at Yanqing. By the way, I heard something today. I wonder if you know about it? What is it? Do you know? The divine general of the left. Yanqing's eyes suddenly darkened. He frowned slightly and looked at little Hachi cautiously. Seeing his expression, little Hachi thought that he didn't know about it either. You haven't heard of it either? Yanqing was slightly startled. Little Hachi nodded thoughtfully. That's right. I've been here for so long, but I haven't heard of this title, let alone you. Yanqing slowly relaxed his hand that was holding the sword. Why do you suddenly mention this? Little Hachi shrugged. Because you have the same name as the divine general of the left. Because of this today Xu Jing deliberately made trouble for me. Yanqing frowned. Did she make things difficult for you? Little Hachi's red lips curled up. She winked at him and said with a smile. How is that possible? Do you think I'm that easy to bully? She wanted you to change your name, but I refused. Speaking of this matter, she instantly forgot all the previous awkwardness. She reached out her hand and tapped Yanqing's shoulder gently. Then she raised her face slightly and said with a bit of pride. I said that the divine general of the left is of noble status. He definitely won't care about such a small matter. Then she had nothing to say. Even if the divine general of the left knows about this, he won't really make things difficult for us, right? Yanqing lowered his eyes and looked at her. Her smile was like a flower, and her enchanting and charming eyes were filled with a little pride and excitement. Probably because she had just returned from the herb mountain, there was still a faint medicinal fragrance on her body. Mixed with her usual sweet fragrance, it was especially fragrant and intoxicating. His Adam's apple bobbed as he nodded. Yes, he won't care about this. Little Hachi raised her eyebrows slightly. I guess so. But Yanqing thought that she was going to leave, but he saw her holding her chin with one hand and looking at him thoughtfully. His heart skipped a beat. But Lord Yanqing, I think there's something I still need to tell you. Little Hachi said after some consideration. It's what you said just now. You better not tell anyone. Yanqing was slightly startled. What? What you said to my 5th brother just now. Little Hachi snorted softly. Since you've helped me a lot, I'll remind you. Although I asked you for help before, you don't have to do so in front of my 5th brother. What if the girl you like hears it in the future and is unhappy? Yanqing pursed his thin lips slightly. Why would she be unhappy? Little Hachi rolled her eyes at him. Of course it's because you can only say this to the person you like. Yanqing was silent for a moment and nodded. I see. Yu Qian came to the door of a courtyard. It was as quiet as ever. He frowned slightly and said, First Oracle Shangguan, you went to the abandoned garden today. After a moment, an indifferent and low voice came from inside. She didn't go in. Yu Qian's heart skipped a beat. Even if the first oracle didn't go out, he could still easily control the situation of the entire illusory god palace. This was something that he couldn't compare with. Everyone thought that he had almost taken over all the power of the first oracle, but that wasn't the case. The first oracle just didn't go out recently, but in fact he had never really given up his power. Every blade of grass, every tree, every movement was under his eyes. After a pause, Yu Qian said again, although she didn't go in, the abandoned garden is actually quite far from where she lives, and the path in the middle is complicated. Logically speaking, it's unlikely that she would go there by herself. What are you trying to say? I suspect that someone deliberately lured her there. Who? Yu Qian choked. In fact, this was just his own guess and there was no evidence. For the time being, he couldn't say who it was. But I don't know. Then go and investigate. The first oracle's voice seemed to be a bit colder. If you can find out, then report. If you can't, then shut up. Yu Qian, do you still need me to teach you the rules of the illusory god palace? Yu Qian was shocked and hurriedly said, yes. He gritted his teeth and couldn't help but speak again. Actually, I just think that there's something wrong with Shangguanyu. First oracle, when do you plan to take the zither score? Chapter 2380. Chu Luiyue didn't have a bloodline totem, so how did she get in? After Yu Qian went back, he thought for a long time and felt that there was only one possibility, the Guqin score. He knew that the first two Guqin scores were in Chu Luiyue's body and had already recognized her as the master. If he wanted to take them back, letting her into the illusory god palace was the most convenient way. After all, this thing couldn't be taken by force, so he had to use other methods. Therefore, Yu Qian believed that this was the intention of the first divine envoy. But he didn't know what method he was going to use and when he was going to do it. After a while, a cold voice came out. Yu Qian, you've overstepped your boundaries. Yu Qian was shocked. I don't dare. The authority of the Guqin score lies with the divine master, not you. Even I am only temporarily in charge of this matter. Everything is according to the divine master's wishes. And you asked, Yu Qian, why don't I give you the position of the first divine envoy? Yu Qian's heart sank. He immediately lifted his clothes and knelt on the ground. Yu Qian definitely didn't mean that. First divine envoy, please understand. He lowered his head and his whole body was tense. Beads of sweat kept rolling down his forehead and his back was already soaked with cold sweat. The first divine envoy rarely said such words. It could be seen that he was really angry this time. After regaining his senses, he finally realized how stupid it was for him to have asked that question. The illusory god palace wasn't under his control. Above him was the divine master and below him was the first divine envoy. The current situation was definitely what these two wanted to see. How could he have the right to say anything? It was just that for a long time, all the big and small affairs of the illusory god palace were handed over to him to deal with. It made him hallucinate that he had the right to say such words. The people inside didn't respond. The courtyard seemed to have returned to its usual silence. However, Yu Qian didn't dare to get up and could only continue to kneel. He closed his eyes and felt annoyed and regretful. He shouldn't have asked about Chu Luiyue. The second divine envoy knelt in front of the first divine envoy. Hearing Su Li's words, Chu Luiyue withdrew his gaze from the medical book in his hands. He was somewhat surprised. Yes. I heard that he has been kneeling for an entire day since yesterday. When I came here, I saw him from afar and he hasn't gotten up yet. Su Li nodded, her expression filled with emotion. I really didn't expect that the high and mighty second messenger would have such a day. Chu Luiyue thought for a moment, then smiled. After all, he is the second divine envoy, not the first divine envoy. Although the one above didn't show his face much, his status was still higher. That's true. However, I don't know what the second divine envoy did to deserve such a punishment. Su Li rested her chin on her hand. He was puzzled. This kneel really made the second messenger lose all face. As long as the first oracle still had any reservations, he would not have done so. This only proved that the Yu Qian had really angered that person. Now the entire illusory god palace knows about this matter. Everyone is discussing it in private. Although there weren't many people here, this matter was too big and everyone was shocked. However, this news will most likely not spread outside. What a pity. Su Li sighed regretfully. Chu Luiyue couldn't help but laugh. Of course. After all, he is the second divine envoy. If the outside world knew about this matter, the Yu Qian would really lose all face. The prestige that had been accumulated over the years would also collapse in an instant. It seems that the first divine envoy just wanted to teach him a lesson. Su Li agreed. I think so too. However, I don't understand why the first divine envoy would suddenly make a move at this time. Didn't that person ignore the affairs of the world for a long time? Chu Luiyue paused for a moment. Maybe the first divine envoy will appear soon. There was still half a year before the gate of heaven closed. The first divine envoy seemed to be gradually taking back his authority. Su Li chuckled. It's hard to say, but I feel that the relationship between the divine envoys is really not that good. Her gaze turned and fell on the medical book in Chu Liyue's hands. Little you, I saw you reading this medical book the last 2 times I came. Haven't you already broken through to Supreme Doctor? Chu Liyue smiled. Above the Supreme Doctor there is still the medical saint. Su Li gasped and looked at her in shock. You plan to break through to the medical saint? But this should be very difficult. I heard that until now, the 8th divine envoy was the only medical saint in the entire illusory god palace. The difficulty of this can be imagined. Moreover, didn't you already enter the illusory god palace? Why did you suddenly think of this matter? Other celestial physicians wanted to break through to the medical saint in order to enter the illusory god palace, but Chu Liyue obviously didn't need to do so. Medical saint naturally has its benefits, Chu Liyue said. Su Li stared at her for a long time and sighed. This road would be extremely difficult, but Chu Liyue clearly intended to continue. If it was someone else, they wouldn't think so much and would just focus on cultivation and wait for the deadline to come in half a year. But she didn't. Chu Liyue clearly had her own considerations for doing this. Since you've already made up your mind, I won't persuade you. Speaking of which, Chu Liyue's medical book was borrowed from Treasure Pavilion. There was only one reason why she wanted to break through to the medical saint level. Dabeo. Ever since she knew Dabeo's identity, her mood had been very complicated. She had long expected that Dabeo was inextricably linked to the illusory god palace, but she didn't expect the truth to be so shocking. Xiaoran's words from that day echoed in her mind from time to time. Purple gold divine armor. An earth-shattering battle. Dabeo's original divine body was definitely extremely powerful. Unfortunately, in order to save her, he forcefully tempered his divine body and was forced to live in a divine body in the shape of a child. Chu Liyue thought that perhaps if she broke through to the medical saint level, she could find a way to help Dabeo solve this problem. Unfortunately, she hadn't found a way even after flipping through many medical books. And the piece of scale that Dabeo left behind didn't show any signs of movement. Chu Liyue looked up at the door. Was Dabeo afraid of the Divine Master? Chapter 2381. Yu Qian knelt outside the first god emissary's door for 3 days and 3 nights. This kneeling caused the entire illusory god palace to tremble. Privately, many people were discussing that the first god emissary was preparing to make a high-profile appearance. However, after the incident, the first god emissary still stayed in his residence and did not go out. This caused many people to be puzzled, but no one dared to go forward and ask. What a joke. The second god emissary was already punished to such an extent. If others rushed forward now, wouldn't they be looking for trouble? Thus, compared to before, the atmosphere in the illusory god palace seemed to have become more subtle. Fewer people came out to walk around. Chu Liyue also stayed in his residence alone for a long time. Of course, it was not because she was afraid of the first god emissary. It was purely because she was busy. Previously in the Red Moon Desert, Dabao had shown her many prescriptions. There was no lack of senior doctors and even senior doctors. Although she was not clear when she was learning, she still learned many things subconsciously. This also allowed her to successfully break through to senior doctor and even senior doctor. However, Dabao did not give her any prescriptions above senior doctor. Thus, if she wanted to break through, she had to think of another way. Fortunately, she had many herbs in her hands. It was enough for her to try again and again. Su Li knew that she was busy, so she did not come again. It was convenient for her to concentrate on her cultivation. On the Star Road, the Xian formation in front of Xiaoran was almost complete. There were only a few strokes left in the middle. At this moment, his face was pale and his forehead was covered with fine beads of sweat. Even his hands were slightly trembling. It was obvious that he had reached his limit. Only his eyes were burning with an inextinguishable fighting spirit. After being trapped by the Xian formation for so many years, he finally saw hope. He would not give up. The surrounding people were also nervously holding their breaths. If Xiaoran could also succeed, then he would be the second person after Chu Liyue to enter the illusory god palace. At that time there was no need to talk about envy and jealousy. Most importantly, it would also give the other Xian masters great encouragement. If one person succeeded, it might be a coincidence. However, if 2 people succeeded, it proved that this method could be used by others. Thus, everyone was very concerned about whether Xiao Ran could succeed or not. No one noticed that at this moment, there was a person who was staring at them from behind the crowd. When Lu Feng came over, she saw such a scene. Qi Han held his sword in one hand and stood beside the star path, looking ahead. He walked over and placed a hand on Qi Han's shoulder. Here to see this again? These few days, Qi Han would come here whenever he was free. He was already used to it. She was looking for him just now, but Qi Han had disappeared without a trace. Lu Feng knew that he must be here. Qi Han did not say anything. Lu Feng followed his gaze and rubbed his chin. There doesn't seem to be anything interesting here. What are you looking at? If you're really interested, why don't you give it a try? But you're not a Xian master, so I'm afraid this will be a little troublesome. Qi Han suddenly said, I am. Lu Feng was dumbfounded. What did you say? Qi Han glanced at him. Ever since I left Tianling, I've been learning. Lu Feng? No, that's not something you can learn just because you want to. I remember you didn't have this talent in the past. From the sound of it, it seemed to have started after Master's accident. But this was a mystic cultivator. This required talent. How could he be like a martial artist, cultivating whenever he wanted to? Qi Han said, I only realized this at that time. Lu Feng took a deep breath and forced herself to accept reality. Then, unwilling to give up, she asked. So what's your level now? Master Xian? And this was a way of giving face. Even for extremely talented Xian masters, it was still very difficult to break through and become a Xian King master in just a few years. Qi Han shook his head. Oh. Lu Feng said, Hey. I knew it. It's fine. Don't be discouraged. Even if he isn't now, he will definitely be in the future. This is the wrong move. Qi Han suddenly said. Lu Feng was stunned. What's wrong? He followed Qi Han's gaze and looked over. Are you talking about Senior Xiao Ran? Isn't this going well? I heard that Senior Xiao Ran had an epiphany after watching Master finish the star path. Since Master has succeeded successfully, then Senior Xiao Ran shouldn't be too bad, right? Why couldn't he see where he went wrong? He changed it back again, Qi Han said. The reason why he walked for so long is because a similar problem occurred before. Xiao Ran did have an epiphany, but it wasn't so simple to do it. In fact, he was able to reach this step because of the accumulation of the previous few years. If it were someone else, they probably wouldn't have been able to take it. Lu Feng stared at the Xian formation with a conflicted expression. Qi Han, why do you seem to know so much? It's about to succeed. Just as Qi Han finished speaking, Xiao Ran drew the last line. Buzz. A buzzing sound suddenly sounded. In an instant, a brilliant light shone. The entire star path flashed again. Xiao Ran had officially cracked the last Xian formation. The fifth divine envoy had been waiting at the side. Seeing this, he nodded slightly. Unlike Chu Liyue, Xiao Ran had some experience in the illusory god palace. It was only because he was trapped in this last Xian formation for many years that he couldn't enter the illusory god palace. Now that he had succeeded, many people were happy to see him succeed. Although he used more time than Chu Liyue, he still succeeded. Xiao Ran, congratulations. Wan Jianfeng's expression became much gentler. Xiao Ran laughed. Thank you, fifth divine envoy. Wan Jianfeng took a step back. Xiao Ran patted his clothes and let out a long sigh of relief. He stared at the door. He had thought about this day for too long, but it didn't come true. In the end, he didn't even know what he was persevering for. He had thought that if he didn't succeed this time, perhaps he would quietly fall one day. He didn't expect. I have to go in and thank little you. Xiao Ran sighed. Wan Jianfeng was a little unhappy when he heard this, but he didn't say anything. After all, Chu Liyue was currently in the illusory god palace. Xiao Ran stretched out his hand and placed it on the door. Then he pushed hard. Unlike Chu Liyue, he pushed open the door without any resistance. At this moment, countless pairs of eyes fell on him. Lu Feng turned his neck stiffly and looked at Qi Han. King really know? Seeing Xiao Ran's figure walk into the illusory god palace, the door closed again. Qi Han turned and left. Lu Feng was stunned. Hey, where are you going? You haven't answered my question. Qi Han didn't even turn his head and casually left a sentence. Walk the star path. Chapter 2382. Lu Feng was dumbfounded. What did you say? Star path? No. Qi Han ignored him and walked toward the heavenly gate. If he wanted to walk the star path, he had to start from the beginning. Lu Feng hurriedly followed. Hey, no, wait a minute. Are you really going to walk the star path? What was Qihan thinking? Did he see that Master and Xiao Ran both succeeded, so he wanted to give it a try? If it was before, Lu Feng might not have taken this matter to heart. But after what happened just now, he vaguely realized that Qihan seemed to be much more powerful than he expected. Moreover, Qihan was not the kind to joke about such things. Lu Feng caught up with Qihan and asked as they walked. Qihan, how confident are you? Why do you seem to be more familiar with Senior Xiao Ran's Xian formation than he is? Hey, say something. Did you secretly cultivate behind my back? When Qihan heard this, he finally opened his mouth. Do I need to cultivate behind your back? Lu Feng was speechless. That seemed to be the case. But why did he feel that something was wrong? He said sourly. We clearly became gods together, and now you want to walk the star path. He felt like he had been cheated. Qihan could not be bothered with him. Lu Feng was the same age as him, so they naturally had more freedom when it came to interacting with each other. When they arrived at the heavenly gate, the two found that there was actually an acquaintance here. He was standing there with his arms crossed, deep in thought. Fifth brother. Lu Feng called out. Wu Yao turned around. Yo, why are you two here too? Lu Feng spread his hands helplessly. Qihan said he wants to walk the star path. Wu Yao looked at Qihan in surprise and then nodded. All right, just be careful. Qihan, yes. Lu Feng? What's going on with you two? Can you show a little bit of attention to the star path? Fifth brother, you didn't come here for the star path, did you? Lu Feng asked weakly. Wu Yao shook his head. No, I'm here to see the heavenly gate. Lu Feng was speechless. Fine, I knew I shouldn't have asked. What was so good about the heavenly gates? Even the 11 divine envoys who were in charge of guarding the heavenly gate weren't that attentive, right? Lu Feng felt that she should find something to do. Otherwise, it would seem that she had nothing to do. Just as he was pondering this question carefully, Qihan had already stepped onto the star path. A silver light spot instantly lit up under his feet. The first Shen King Division star formation broken. Lu Feng was terrified. Didn't you just say that you're not a Shen King master? Qihan continued to move forward expressionlessly. I am indeed not a Shen King master. I am a Grand Shen King teacher. Inside the room, a medicinal cauldron was placed in the middle of the room. A cluster of flames was burning quietly within. A rich medicinal fragrance gradually spread out from within. At a certain moment, Jian Fengqi finally made his move and slapped the cauldron with his palm. Condense. Bang. Several medicinal pills shot out from the flames in an instant. Jian Fengqi was already prepared. He grabbed the jade box beside him and put all the pills into it. The box closed instantly. Jian Fengqi glanced at it and nodded in satisfaction. Phew, I'm finally done. These were the pills that he promised to give to Ant 11 and Ant 12. He walked over and put away the medicinal cauldron. Seeing the charred mark on the ground, he could not help but sigh. This was a mark that he accidentally left behind when he tried to break through to Master Doctor. At that time, who would have thought that the days after breaking through to Master Doctor would be like this? Jian Fengqi silently felt sorry for himself. Was it easy to get a wife these days? He weighed the jade box in his hand and planned to go out. When he reached the door, he had just placed one hand on the door when he suddenly realized that something was wrong. He immediately moved his feet. Bang! Mu Hongyu fell from the void and crashed into something. It didn't seem to hurt. She was stunned for a moment. Then she smelled a faint medicinal fragrance. A low laugh came from above. This time I didn't do anything. You crashed into it yourself. Mu Hongyu immediately looked up. Jian Fengqi? Why is it you again? Jian Fengqi was very innocent. This is my room. Mu Hongyu looked around and found that this was indeed his territory. At this moment he was standing in front of her with his back against the door. His hands were raised high and one of them was holding a jade box. It seemed that she really came here on her own. Mu Hongyu coughed awkwardly and immediately took 2 steps back. Jian Fengqi then saw that there was a pool of blood on her shoulder. His expression changed. What's with your injury? Mu Hongyu tilted her shoulder and said vaguely, It's nothing, just a small injury. How could it be nothing? Jian Fengqi knew that she was trying to break through to Mahayana realm recently. She was constantly traveling through various spaces and would indeed be injured from time to time. But those were at most bumps and bruises. She had never seen blood. But this time the situation was obviously different. Mu Hongyu looked away guiltily. It's really nothing. I still have something to do. I'll leave first. With that she was about to leave. Jian Fengqi took a step forward and blocked her way. What's going on? He had always been carefree and unrestrained, and there was always a smile on his lips. This was the first time he had such an attitude. Mu Hongyu's eyes flashed with a hint of hesitation. Jian Fengqi raised his eyebrows slightly. You don't want to say? Then I'll go and ask Li. Mu Hongyu hurriedly grabbed his arm. Don't go. Jian Fengqi's heart skipped a beat, but when he saw that the blood on her shoulder was still spreading, his expression turned colder. Without any explanation he grabbed Mu Hongyu's wrist and checked the condition of her body. After confirming that she was fine internally and had indeed only suffered a flesh wound, his expression relaxed. But with Mu Hongyu's physique, it was obviously not easy to leave such a wound on her body. He handed over a jade bottle. Do you want to deal with it yourself or do you want me to help you? Mu Hongyu hurriedly took it. I'll do it myself. Jian Fengqi lowered his head and looked at her. Suddenly he chuckled. With that contract, even if I insist on helping you, you should listen to me. Mu Hongyu glared at him. What, you want to force me? Jian Fengqi's lips curled into an evil smile. He leaned over slightly and whispered. Don't worry, I'm not willing to do that. The two of them were very close to each other. When he spoke, she could feel his warm breath gently. She could even hear his breathing. She was about to speak when she saw a faint luster in his shimmering peach blossom eyes. It was rare for him to be so serious. She blushed slightly and swallowed the rest of her words. She only lowered her head and muttered. What are you talking about? Jian Fengqi raised his eyebrows. Mu Hongyu waved at him. I want to change the dressing. You go out first. Chapter 2383. Jian Fengqi raised his hand to cover his eyes. I promise I won't look. Mu Hongyu didn't believe him and stared at him suspiciously. Jian Fengqi's lips curled up. Don't worry, I'll only look if you let me. Mu Hongyu snorted, turned around, took off her clothes and applied medicine on her wound. Jian Fengqi really waited at the side. After Mu Hongyu finished treating her wound, she said, It's done. Jian Fengqi put his hand down and his gaze swept past her shoulders before he said, Now you can tell me, right? Mu Hongyu paused and said, It's not a big deal. I just wanted to try entering the illusionary god sea directly, but I didn't succeed. I was squeezed by the chaotic space below and became like this. Jian Fengqi frowned slightly. You haven't reached the Mahayana realm yet. It's too risky. Mu Hongyu shrunk her neck. I was just trying, but it's not all for nothing. At least I know where to avoid next time. Jian Fengqi stared at her cautiously. No, with your current strength you shouldn't be injured like this. Mu Hongyu didn't expect Jian Fengqi to know so much about this matter, so she had to admit honestly, Ahem, I was in a hurry when I left and didn't take care of it, so this happened. Jian Fengqi raised his eyebrows and asked, Why are you in such a hurry? Mu Hongyu spread her hands. Someone suddenly went over. How can I not be anxious? If I walked any slower I would have been discovered. Who? I'm not sure. Mu Hongyu bit her lip and murmured uncertainly, I think it's the first divine envoy, but I don't think so. Jian Fengqi said seriously, At this moment, who else can enter and exit the illusionary god sea at will other than him? Basically, it was the first divine envoy. Mu Hongyu shook her head. But that person, I feel a little familiar. I feel like I've seen him somewhere before. But I was running so fast that I didn't have time to think about it. Familiar? I heard that the first divine envoy rarely leaves the illusory shrine. Even the other divine envoys have a hard time meeting him. Why do you feel that he's familiar? Jian Fengqi was puzzled. Mu Hongyu paused for a while and sighed. Sigh, if you were there at that time you would know why I said that. It's really, she rubbed her temples in annoyance. Jian Fengqi's heart skipped a beat. You think it's someone I know? Mu Hongyu nodded affirmatively. Yes. At this time Xiao Ran finally successfully entered the illusory god palace. He specifically asked Wan Jianfeng where Chu Liyue lived and headed there. When they arrived, Chu Liyue was sitting in the courtyard, picking out medicinal herbs. Little Yu, Xiao Ran happily greeted Chu Liwei. Chu Liwei looked up and instantly smiled when she saw that it was him. Senior Xiao Ran, congratulations. There was no surprise on her face. Obviously she had expected Xiao Ran to come in. As she spoke, she walked over to open the door. Xiao Ran laughed. I'm here to thank you. If it weren't for you, I don't know how long I would have to wait to crack the last Xian formation. Chu Liu's eyes curved as she invited Xiao Ran to sit. You're too polite. In fact, it's mainly because of you. Otherwise, why would so many people be watching, and why would you be the only one to come in? Xiao Ran just needed a little inspiration and she just happened to be there. Originally, walking the Star Road and entering the illusory God Palace was her original plan. It was purely an accident that she could help Xiao Ran. She didn't want to take credit for it. However, Xiao Ran was still very grateful to her and smiled. No matter what, I owe you a favor. Seeing his persistence, Chu Liwei pursed her lips and smiled. She didn't refuse anymore. Xiao Ran looked at the various medicinal herbs in the courtyard and asked curiously, "Are you refining pills?" "Yes." "An all-rounder is indeed different from us." Xiao Ran sighed with emotion. She just entered the illusory God Palace and started refining pills. The key point was that she was already a supreme doctor. People really couldn't be compared to each other. "I'm just refining for fun." Chu Liwei smiled. "Our 11th and 12th aunt like these things very much, so I wanted to prepare some for them as snacks." Xiao Ran, there was too much information in one sentence and he didn't know how to respond. After a long time he said sincerely, "Little you're already very powerful, but your subordinates aren't weak either." Although they were the same as Chu Liwei and didn't have a bloodline totem, they had already won against many people in the current situation. It really made people sigh. Maybe after a while they will also have people coming in. Chu Liwei smiled but didn't say anything. The 13 you guard each had their own abilities. Whether they could enter or not depended on themselves. After she finished processing the last few herbs in her hands, Chu Liwei asked in a seemingly casual manner. "Oh right, Senior Xiao Ran, there are a few forbidden areas in the illusory God Palace. You must be careful. Don't be like me and almost accidentally barged in." Xiao Ran said. "Of course I know. What? You said you almost barged in? What are you talking about?" Halfway through he suddenly regained his senses and hurriedly asked. Chu Liu's eyes flashed and said with a smile. "Don't worry, I'm fine. Before I entered I was stopped by the second divine emissary. Fortunately, the second divine emissary was magnanimous and didn't punish me." Xiao Ran heard this and heaved a sigh of relief. That's good, that's good. The forbidden areas of the illusory God Palace are not to be entered. The second divine emissary probably didn't pursue the matter because you just entered the illusory God Palace. However, the forbidden areas of the illusory God Palace are extremely difficult to approach. Logically speaking, it's not easy to enter. Where did you go? Chu Liwei gently smiled and said. I also don't know where it is. I just stood outside the wall and saw a peach blossom fly out. Xiao Ran was startled and suddenly stood up. He looked at her in disbelief. Abandoned garden? You actually went there? It was the first time Chu Liwei saw such a big reaction from Xiao Ran. He couldn't help but pause and slowly asked. Abandoned garden? Where is that? Chapter 2384. Xiao Ran's expression was extremely complicated. After a long while he said, That's the Emperor's territory. No one has come close for 10,000 years. Don't go there again. The Emperor. Chu Liwei was stunned. Isn't this the illusory God Palace? Logically speaking, everything here should be under the control of the Divine Master. Yes, but after the great battle 10,000 years ago, the Emperor personally took over the abandoned garden. I heard that even the divine envoys don't dare to enter rashly. Even the first divine envoy is among them. Even the Divine Master has to show some respect to the Emperor. If he wants to occupy a place and not allow anyone to enter, it's naturally not difficult. But this matter itself is a little strange. Chu Liwei narrowed his eyes. Didn't you say that the Emperor didn't interfere in the battle back then? But Xiao Ran shook his head. I'm not very clear about the secret behind this. But for this kind of thing, the less you know the better. Listen to my advice. Don't go there again and don't ask about anything related to it. It's not something they can know. Chu Liwei wanted to say something but stopped. Seeing Xiao Ran's determined expression, he nodded. Thank you for your reminder, Senior Xiaoran. Silence reigned in the hall. Suddenly the void vibrated and a figure walked out. It was Rongxiu. He came to the table and knocked 3 times. Umo, who had been guarding outside the door, heard the sound and heaved a sigh of relief. Master is finally back. He turned around and pushed the door open. Master. Umo bowed respectfully. Master Qihan has gone to the star path. I know. Rongxiu said and flicked his wrist. Swoosh. The Pantheon record flew out and unfolded in front of him instantly. Countless names were listed on it. However, among them there were a few names that were particularly eye-catching. Rongxiu's gaze swept past those names and finally landed on a place that had been burned. There seemed to be a name there, but it was covered by the flames and couldn't be seen clearly. However, compared to the last time, this name had clearly moved forward a lot. A layer of faint golden light flickered. Rongxiu frowned. Yumo asked cautiously. Master, there is only half a year left before the gate of heaven closes. You keep waiting. Yes. A month passed in the blink of an eye. Bang. A muffled sound came from the heavenly square cauldron. Flames suddenly rose from within before they were quickly extinguished. The pill that was about to take shape was thus charred black. A faint burnt smell filled the air. Chu Luiyue frowned slightly. Failure. It was still failure. She couldn't even remember how many times this had happened. It was indeed not that easy to become a medical saint. Little you, Su Li's voice came from outside with a hint of excitement and agitation. Chu Luiyue put away the heavenly square cauldron and walked out the door. Mr. Su, what's wrong? Su Li hurried over and was about to speak when she suddenly smelled a faint burnt smell from the room. You're still refining pills? Chu Luiyue nodded and smiled helplessly. And I failed again. Su Li comforted her. You just became a medical master not long ago. How can you become a medical saint so quickly? If it's really that easy, I think all the celestial physicians out there might as well give up on their lives. Don't worry, I know this. Chu Luiyue wasn't someone who was eager for quick success. She knew very well how difficult it was to take this step. So even though she kept failing, her mentality was still relatively stable. What's wrong today? Why are you so happy? Su Li was a little surprised. You still don't know? Well, you've been busy refining pills recently. You don't have much time and energy to care about the outside world. Chu Luiyue saw the undisguised joy and excitement in her eyes and brows and smiled. What's wrong? Su Li took a deep breath and calmed down. Qihan. Qihan is walking on the star path. Chu Luiyue was stunned. She really didn't know about this. Little you, do you know where he is now? Looking at Su Li's expression, Chu Luiyue guessed. Has he finished walking on the Xian formation of the Xian King division? Su Li shook her head and said word by word. Great Grandmaster. He just cracked the last Xian formation of the Great Xian King division. Chu Luiyue was really shocked. Really? Of course it's true. Now everyone knows about this except for you. Qihan was Chu Luiyue's subordinate. Just by using this identity to walk on the star path, it was enough to attract attention. But Qihan's performance was very outstanding. No, outstanding was no longer enough to describe it. It was simply shocking. His speed is only slightly slower than yours back then. Su Li sighed with emotion. Now many people are betting whether he will continue or not. If he walked any further, he would be a great grandmaster. Just as she finished speaking, a sound came from afar. Resplendent light soared into the sky and quickly bloomed into an extremely complicated Xian formation. Chu Luiyue and Su Li looked over at the same time. A great grandmaster Xian formation. The courtyard fell into a short period of dead silence. After a while, Su Li finally couldn't help but mutter. He actually succeeded. How long had it been? She looked at Chu Luiyue with unconcealable shock. Little you, your subordinates, are all so powerful? How could Chu Luiyue not be shocked? Actually, Qihan had never displayed his talent as a Xian master before. She only found out when she accidentally heard Sun Yi mention that Qihan seemed to be interested in Xian formations and borrowed some Xian formation diagrams from her. But even so, she didn't take this matter to heart. Who knew that today, he had actually become a great grandmaster? At this moment, the onlookers on both sides of the Star Road were also shocked by Qihan's actions. Originally, after Xiaoran entered the illusory god palace, they all went back. who knew that not long after, they heard that Qihan was walking on the Star Road again and that it was extremely smooth. More people came to watch. It was only now that Qihan had stepped into the great Grandmaster realm that everyone was stunned. Lu Feng stood at the side and looked at the Xian formation above Qihan's head. The corner of his mouth twitched. Then he looked at Qihan and gritted his teeth. Qihan, didn't you say that you were a great Grandmaster Xian? What was with this great Grandmaster Xian formation? Qihan's face was expressionless as usual. I also just broke through, so I didn't lie to you. Lu Feng was speechless. Listen, is this human language? Many people in the crowd sucked in a cold breath. Then someone whispered. Why is this Qihan the same as his master? Chu Liwei said the same thing back then. She still remembered that countless people were defeated by her words. She never expected that there would be another Qihan. Chapter 2385. He thought that Chu Liwei was enough to make people envious, jealous, and hateful. But now, even her subordinate was so heaven-defying. He really couldn't live like this. Even Lu Feng couldn't help but twitch his mouth. He wanted to slap himself. Who told you to talk too much? Who told you to ask? He broke through to the great Grandmaster so easily. What about me? Lu Feng was very sad. Wasn't it fun to be a god together? But Qihan turned out to be a great Grandmaster. How could he bear it? Lu Feng wanted to run away. But after thinking about it, he gritted his teeth and stayed. He was also very curious whether Qihan could succeed. Qihan retracted his gaze, turned a deaf ear to the various gazes and discussions around him, and continued forward. On the other side, little Hachi was strolling around the herb mountain. Hearing the commotion, she raised her eyes and looked in that direction. Her red lips curled into a mischievous smile. Seventh brother really hid his strength well. In the blink of an eye, he became a great Grandmaster. If he could really complete the star path, then wouldn't seventh brother be able to enter the palace of the illusory god? One had to know that no one in the 13U had entered yet. Thinking of this, little Hachi quickened her movements. Although she was lazy, she was still very clear-headed when it came to critical situations. Why is there so little Fuyu grass here? Little Hachi frowned slightly. Although this item was not considered rare, it was still considered quite precious because it was required by many senior doctor-level pills. She didn't expect there to be only a little left here. Looking at the small tuft of Fuyu grass that was only an inch long, little Hachi shrugged. She couldn't take it all away with this little bit. Besides, this age wasn't enough. She tapped her chin and her eyes suddenly lit up. Right, the last time she came here with Jian Fengqi, there seemed to be a large patch of Fuyu grass behind that short mountain. Maybe she could get some back there. Thinking of this, little Hachi immediately went there. Little Hachi was very fast. In less than an hour she arrived at that place again. Her figure was as light as a butterfly as she traversed through the forest. This time she had experience. She first stood at a certain spot and looked ahead. There doesn't seem to be anyone here today. For some reason, Xu Jing had been coming to Herb Mountain less often recently. Out of sight, out of mind, little Hachi was quite relaxed during this period of time. After all, no one would be in a good mood if they met someone who always wanted to target them. After confirming that Xu Jing wasn't around, Adi felt much more at ease. He lifted his feet and walked forward. Suddenly, an obstructive force came and stopped her. Little Hachi stopped what she was doing. Then she saw a light green barrier slowly forming in front of her. It was the one who had appeared before. The power that little Hachi felt just now also came from this. It was just past noon and the sun was shining brightly. The stream was sparkling and the wind blew past, causing large patches of lush vegetation to sway. There seemed to be lines on the light green barrier that were faintly discernible. At a glance, it was very magnificent and beautiful. This barrier. Little Hachi was delighted when she saw it. She subconsciously reached out her hand and touched the barrier. Buzz, a faint buzzing sound came from it, but it quickly dissipated in the wind. Little Hachi widened her beautiful eyes slightly. That was because, after the initial obstruction, her hand smoothly passed through the barrier. Her slender and fair hand passed through the light green barrier silently, as if she had reached into a pool of clear water. It was clear, transparent, and cool. She blinked and waved her hand gently. The faintly discernible fragments of light on the barrier swayed along with it. It was a beautiful sight. Little Hachi was pleasantly surprised. Why didn't she realize that this barrier was so She thought for a while and realized that she could not think of a suitable word to describe this feeling. Everything that happened here last time was still vivid in her mind. She remembered clearly that this barrier did not belong to Xu Jing. She did not even have half of her control over it. At that time little Hachi only thought that it was very funny. She did not expect that the barrier would be so friendly to her now. Little Hachi's heart moved. She reached out both hands and peeled the barrier from the middle. The barrier flowed quietly to both sides like water. An entrance appeared in front of little Hachi. Little Hachi was surprised. She took half a step back, retracted her hand and gently covered her mouth. The barrier in front of her returned to its original appearance in the blink of an eye, as if everything just now was just an illusion. But of course it was not an illusion. Little Hachi hesitated for a moment. Finally she opened the barrier again and stepped in. Then she turned around to take a look. The barrier had reassembled and quickly disappeared. However, little Hachi knew that the barrier was still there. She recalled the patterns on it just now, and a hint of suspicion flashed across her eyes. That pattern looked somewhat familiar. She thought for a moment and suppressed her thoughts for the time being. She went to the stream and found the lush fuyu grass. She picked some and put it away before turning to leave. When little Hachi returned to the courtyard, she saw Tsun-yi. He stood in the courtyard with one hand behind his back. He was looking in the direction of the star path with a distant gaze. He seemed to be looking at Chi-han. Big brother. Tsun-yi turned around when he heard the voice. Little Hachi walked over and stood beside him. She followed his gaze and looked in that direction. Big brother, you can't see anything from here. If you're really concerned about seventh brother's situation, wouldn't it be better to go to the star path directly? Tsun-yi said indifferently. There's no need. Little Hachi thought for a moment and asked tentatively. Big brother, you mean, you're certain that seventh brother will succeed? Tsun-yi didn't say anything, but his meaning was obvious. Little Hachi was instantly disappointed. Ah, then won't I be the first to enter the illusory god palace with master? Big brother's predictions are godly. He has never been wrong. If he thinks that Chi-han can do it, then there is definitely no other possibility. Tsun-yi glanced at her. If you want to go in, you need to break through to the medical sage first. That day is still far away. Little Hachi's face fell. Big brother, there are some things that you don't have to be so direct. All right. Big brother, have you been to Herb Mountain before? Tsun-yi's eyes flickered. What's wrong? Nothing. I just saw a barrier at Herb Mountain today. The patterns on the barrier feel a little familiar. As little Hachi spoke, she quickly glanced at Tsun-yi, wanting to see something from his face. She actually didn't finish her sentence. That was because she didn't just feel familiar with the patterns on the spirit formation. To be precise, she had seen the exact same patterns at Big Brother's place before. Chapter 2386. Unfortunately, Tsun-yi was extremely shrewd and did not show his emotions on his face. Little Hachi's fighting strength was basically zero in front of him, so he could not see anything. So? Tsun-yi asked indifferently. His expression was too open and straightforward, so little Hachi became the one who was confused by the question. Nothing. I just said it casually. Cough. Little Hachi almost bit her own tongue as she felt vexed. What was she thinking? Why did she think that the barrier had something to do with Big Brother? She might as well think about how she sensed the existence of the barrier. Tsun-yi retracted his gaze. Just as little 8 was about to leave, he suddenly thought of something and leaned over to ask softly. She leaned over and whispered, Big brother, it shouldn't be difficult for you to enter the palace of the illusory god, right? If the 13 Yu guards had to choose the most powerful and qualified person to enter the palace of the illusory god, little Hachi would choose Tsun-yi without hesitation. It was not just her. The rest of the 13 Yu guards basically had the same thought. But for some reason, Tsun-yi had not done anything until now. In fact, he did not even go out many times. It was really strange. Tsun-yi narrowed his eyes slightly. What's the rush? What was meant to come would come. After entering the area of the Great Grandmaster Xian formation, Chi-han's speed clearly slowed down. Of course, this was compared to Chu Liwei. Considering that he had just broken through to the Great Grandmaster realm, this was already very heaven-defying. After all, he did not stop at all and kept walking forward. Those Xian formations that had once stumped countless Xian masters seemed to have become simple and easy in front of him. Jinyan Lai stood on the stairs and looked at the star path. His brows were slightly furrowed as if they were covered in a thin layer of frost. It was obvious that his current mood was definitely not good. There was already Chu Luiyue in front of him, but now there was another Qi Han. Jin Yunlai knew this star path too well. According to Qi Han's current performance, it wouldn't take long for him to finish the star path and arrive at the palace of the illusory god. For 10,000 years, Jin Yunlai had thought of countless methods, hoping that someone would be able to do this. But without exception all of them failed. Even Mu Yafeng, whom he had once thought the most highly of, was the same. In order to let Mu Yafeng succeed, he did not hesitate to use some private means, but the final result was still very disappointing. Even he himself was severely punished for this matter. However, he had never expected that in such a short period of time, Chu Luiyue and Xiao Ran would succeed one after another. Looked like there would be another 7 colds. If he had known earlier, why would he have chosen Mu Yafeng? However, it was too late to say anything now. Furthermore, the existence of Chu Luiyue and Qi Han would only remind him of the wrong choice he had made back then. Treasure Pavilion. He was standing behind the counter checking the account books. Recently, the illusory god palace was very lively, so this place was naturally much more deserted. However, Qi didn't mind it too much. Instead, he enjoyed this rare moment of leisure. At this moment, the sound of footsteps was heard. Mingshu did not even raise his head. "Sorry, we're closed for the day. Please go back, sir." A voice came from outside the door. "Sir Yu, I'm not here to buy anything." Hearing this voice, Mingshu's heart skipped a beat and he immediately looked up. When he saw the person's appearance, his pupils suddenly shrank. "Why are you here?" Chapter 2387. The person who came was a young man who looked to be in his late 20s. His appearance was ordinary and could at most be considered decent. However, his temperament was outstanding. He was dressed in a grayish-blue brocade robe and had broad shoulders and a narrow waist. He had a faint scholarly air about him. When he heard Yu's reply, he laughed. "Lord Yu doesn't seem to welcome me?" Yu chuckled and put away the account book. The corners of his mouth curved into a perfect and polite smile. "How can that be? My Jin Bao Pavilion naturally welcomes the arrival of the third divine envoy." Although he said that, he stood behind the counter and did not take half a step forward. The corners of his eyes and the tips of his eyebrows were cold and distant. There was not the slightest hint of welcome. However, Fan Yunxiao did not mind. To be precise, he did not mind. Jin Bao Pavilion's attitude towards him had always been like this. He had long been used to it. Fan Yunxiao walked in and looked around. "I didn't expect Jin Bao Pavilion to have such a deserted day." Ming Shu disagreed. "The star path is quite lively. Third divine envoy, why don't you go there and take a look?" Fan Yunxiao laughed. "That's not necessary. I came here today specifically for Jin Bao Pavilion. I wonder if the second master is upstairs?" Yu frowned. "Second master is not feeling well and is recuperating. If you have anything to say, third divine envoy, you can tell me. It's the same." "Oh." Fan Yunxiao nodded in understanding. Then she asked with some doubt, "I remember that second master's health has always been very good. Why did he fall ill when he came back this time? If I remember correctly, it has been half a year. Why hasn't second master improved? If it really doesn't work, I'll ask the 8th divine envoy to come over and take a look. Then there's no need to trouble yourself." Ming Shu chose to refuse without thinking. Hu Jing. If she came, he was afraid that second master would fall ill even if he was not sick. That person was not easy to deal with. They were used to not dealing with her. Second master is just tired. He just needs to rest well. There's no big problem. Third divine envoy, you don't have to be so worried. Ming Shu's attitude was resolute. Fan Yunxiao's expression faded. Even a fool could see that you did not welcome him. No matter what, he was still the third divine emissary. So when others saw him, they had to be polite. However, every time he came to the treasure pavilion, he was given the cold shoulder. Since Zhao had such an attitude, Fan Yunxiao could not be bothered to waste her breath. "I'm here to borrow something." Ming Shu smiled. "Third divine envoy, you have a noble status. What do you want? Why do you still want to borrow things from our treasure pavilion?" Fan Yunxiao did not care about his tone and said, "Only the treasure pavilion has this item that I want to borrow." Ming Shu seemed to have thought of something as his eyes narrowed. "Sure enough," Fan Yunxiao said, "I want to borrow the treasure pavilion's account book." Ming Shu laughed out loud. "Third messenger, I don't quite understand what you're saying." You're in charge of the internal accounts of the palace of the illusory god. It has nothing to do with my precious treasure pavilion, right? Asking for the account book as soon as he arrived, wasn't that too shameless? Fan Yunxiao said, the divine gate is about to close. The palace of the illusory god needs to settle the previous debts. You and I both know that the treasure pavilion's account book is the most complete. That's why I'm here. Lord Yu, don't tell me you don't want to borrow it? How can that be? Yu laughed and patted the account book under him. I don't dare to not give it to the third divine envoy. However, I can't make the decision on such a big matter. I have to go up and ask the second master for his opinion. Would you please? I'll wait here. Yu glanced at him and turned to go upstairs. Fan Yunxiao had one hand behind her back. Her expression was calm and composed, as if she was certain that the other party would definitely give her the account book. You want the account book? Yengu did not even turn his head. Oh no. What a joke. At this point, who still wanted to have anything to do with them? A burden. Tell him that he doesn't have to come and ask for it in the future. If he insists, tell him to ask the first master for it. You came down contentedly and conveyed Yan Ji's words to Fan Yunxiao without missing a word. Third divine envoy, you see, I have no choice, right? The second master has given an order. How can we dare to disobey? You should go back now. Fan Yunxiao's expression was gloomy. However, the other party had directly mentioned the first master. He did not dare to make a fuss. After the negotiation failed, Fan Yunxiao finally left with a belly full of anger. Mingshu snorted and went to close the door. At this moment, footsteps came from upstairs. It was Yengu who came downstairs for the first time. Yu hurriedly said, Second Master, why did you come down? Yengu waved his hand. Now that Madame is in the palace of the illusory god and all her attention should be on the star path, it's no big deal for me to come down for a walk. He was really bored to death during this period of time. Mingshu heaved a sigh of relief. That's true. However, I really didn't expect the third divine envoy to come and ask for the account book. Yengu snorted. He just wants to see what kind of trump cards the cultivators in the illusory god palace have. This way, when the heavenly gate closes, the palace of the illusory god will have a rough idea of who can truly ascend to the heavens and become a god. This way they can prepare early. In short, they just want to control everything in their own hands. Divine artifacts, pills, Xian formation diagrams. Every account book in Zhenbao Pavilion could clearly show all of this. Of course, the palace of the illusory god wanted to take a look. Mingshu nodded in understanding. I see. However, this Fan Yunxiao is also a little interesting. He wants other people's things so easily, Yengu did not like this person to begin with. After today's incident, he was even more annoyed. If he comes again in the future, we will not meet him. Yes. Zhuwei answered and said, yes. Then, what if he insists on going upstairs? After all, he was the third divine envoy. If Fan Yunxiao was stubborn, it would not be easy for them to deal with him. Yengu raised his eyelids and sneered. Then ask him to leave. I want to see if he really dares to behave atrociously here. Not to mention Fan Yunxiao, even the two above him might not dare to do so. Yu's mouth twitched. Yengu came to the counter and sat down. He stretched his back. Bam. Another sound was heard. Needless to say, Qi Han must have deciphered another Grandmaster Xian formation. Listen this commotion. How lively is the Star Road. Yanji's face was filled with envy and emotion. He also wanted to go out and take a look. Yu looked at his second master and felt a rare sense of sympathy. Second master, why don't you, bam, playing? Before Mingshu could finish speaking, a figure suddenly fell from the sky. Chapter 2388. Mingshu's voice stopped abruptly. Yengu froze on the spot. Mu Hongyu rubbed her wrists. TSK. Why did I fail again? Suddenly, her eyes widened as she looked at Yengu in front of her in confusion. The two of them stared at each other and the surroundings fell into a dead silence. Yanji's body went numb and his mind went blank. Mu Hongyu. Why was he here? Mu Hongyu was also stunned. She rubbed her eyes hard. He was still there. Second Master Yan. Why are you here? Mu Hongyu asked in disbelief. Yanji's mind started to work furiously. Why was he here? Why was he here? As he was thinking, Mu Hongyu had already gotten up quickly and rushed over. She grabbed his face across the counter. It's true. She was so shocked that she lost her voice. Yan Gu. Yan Gu tried his best to remain calm and removed Mu Hongyu's hand. Miss Mu, you must have mistaken me for someone else. How do you know my surname is Mu? Yan Gu was so frustrated that he wanted to slap himself. The more anxious he was, the more he made a mistake. I've heard of you before. You were also the one who gave the Mahayana realm incantation, right? Yan Gu tried to make himself look more dignified and stood up to leave. Mu Hongyu's eyes flashed and she raised her voice. Second Master Yan, I haven't seen you for a few years. You seem to have become rounder. Yan Gu turned around in anger. Nonsense. Mu Hongyu spread her hands. You admit it? Yan Ji's forehead twitched. Careless. Careless. Mu Hongyu looked at him smugly. She had already said so much. Was he still not going to admit it? Yan Gu took a deep breath. Follow me up. With that he gave Ming a look. Ming Shu immediately understood and carefully checked the shop again. After making sure that no one else was around, he nodded slightly. Mu Hongyu looked at Yan Gu and then at Ming. He suddenly realized something. Second Master Yan, you are... He was from Zhenbao Pavilion. Furthermore, it looks like his status is even higher than Lord Qi's. This treasure pavilion is yours? In an instant Mu Hongyu understood many things. No wonder, no wonder. Wasn't this place also called Treasure Pavilion? Yan Gu pleaded for mercy. Young lady, lower your voice. I'm not deaf. Originally he just wanted to go downstairs to get some fresh air. Who knew that he would bump into Mu Hongyu? If it had been someone else he might have been alerted. However, this person had to be Mu Hongyu. She was already in the minor realization realm and was not far from the Mahayana realm, so it was extremely easy for her to come here without anyone noticing. In the end, Yan Gu was caught off guard today. Yan Gu was very regretful. If he had stayed in his room, then everything would have been fine. Previously, in order to prevent being discovered by Chu Luyue, he had even set up several layers of defense around the room. Ordinary people would not be able to enter. In the end, he managed to guard against Chu Luyue, but not against Mu Hongyu. Mu Hongyu immediately raised a finger. All right, but you have to tell me everything clearly. Yan Ji's head hurt as he turned and went upstairs. Mu Hongyu hurriedly followed him. Halfway through she turned back to look at Zhao. These people. Had they already colluded with each other? Ming shuddered and immediately looked down, pretending to be dead. This was all Second Master's idea. It had nothing to do with him. Mu Hongyu snorted softly and looked at Yan Gu with a burning gaze. She had to get to the bottom of this today. From the first floor to the second floor it only took a few breaths, but Yan Gu felt as if 2 holes were being burned in his back. He forced himself to support himself, walked to the door and pushed it open. Come in and talk. Behind him, Mu Hongyu's figure had already disappeared. He was shocked when he heard a voice behind him. Second Master Yan, I'm here. Mu Hongyu had already entered the room and found herself a seat. She patted the chair in front of her. Come, sit down and talk. Yan Gu. Why did he feel as if he was about to be trampled on? Yan Gu resigned himself to fate and closed the door. He moved with difficulty and slowly walked to Mu Hongyu. The two of them looked at each other for a moment. Second Master of Zhenbao Pavilion. Is you? You were also the one who used all sorts of excuses to refuse to meet Lu Yu? You were also the one who gave us the mythical flame diagram and the Mahayana technique? Second Master Yan, say something. Yan Gu took a deep breath and nodded stiffly. Mu Hongyu stared at him fixedly. From country Yaoqin to the illusory god palace. Obviously all of this had been arranged long ago. Yan Gu put his palms together. Little miss, it's not impossible for me to tell you, but you have to promise me that you'll keep it a secret. Mu Hongyu raised her eyebrows. Keep it a secret? This isn't something shameful. Why do I have to keep it a secret? Yan Gu was speechless. I'm forced by life, forced by life. Mu Hongyu thought for a while and said, Then tell me first, what's going on? Did you target Lu Yu long ago? Other than this, she really couldn't think of any other reason. Yan Gu sighed. It's a long story. Zhao stayed downstairs and kept watch. From time to time he would look up feeling a little worried. It had been so long. Why hadn't they come down yet? Could it be that the second master couldn't handle it and gave up everything? Then, what about the first master? Chapter 2389. That's basically it. After Yan Gu finished speaking, the room finally quieted down. Mu Hongyu was in a daze. Yengu waited for a while. Seeing that she did not move, he waved his hand in front of her eyes. Hongyu, Hongyu. Mu Hongyu came back to her senses and looked at him with a complicated expression. So, you already knew that Lu Yu had the Guqin score, so you went to Yaochen early on? Yengu nodded. Yes. But later on, I realized that the Guqin score had already recognized her as its owner, so I came back. There was nothing wrong with this explanation. It was just that Yengu omitted the most important one. He really did not dare to say it. Moreover, he was only following his master's instructions. As for the specific reason, only his master knew. He could not say it even if he wanted to. Mu Hongyu was deep in thought. She had heard about the Guqin score long ago. She could not find any fault with Yen Ji's explanation. But, if it's just for the Guqin score, Second Master Yen, you seem to be taking too much care of Lu Yu, right? Yen Ji's expression immediately turned serious. That's a must. The Guqin score belongs to the palace of the illusory god and is very important. Since she's the owner of the Guqin score, we should do the same. Mu Hongyu asked in return. Since it belongs to the palace of the illusory god, why is Zhenbao Pavilion so concerned about it? Yengu coughed. Zhenbao Pavilion and the palace of the illusory god are inextricably linked. We also hope that the Guqin score can return to the palace of the illusory god smoothly. In that case, won't the palace of the illusory god want to snatch Lu Yu's Guqin score? So that's not the case. Don't you see that the palace of the illusory god is very polite to her now? As long as she's in the palace of the illusory god, doesn't that mean that the Guqin score is also there? Mu Hongyu thought about it and felt that it made sense, but she also felt that something was not quite right. Yengu said, I've said everything that needs to be said. Now you should be satisfied, right? Mu Hongyu took a deep breath and tried her best to calm the waves in her heart. After a while she said, I understand. After saying that, he got up and was about to leave. Yengu hurriedly said, Hey, you promised me that you would keep it a secret. Mu Hongyu frowned. Actually, it doesn't matter even if Lu Yu finds out about this. She's not a petty person. Second Master Yen, what are you worried about? Yengu sighed helplessly. I know that. In fact, I've been looking for an opportunity to talk to her, but I haven't found the right time, so it's been delayed until now. Therefore, I would like you to keep this a secret for the time being. I will find an opportunity to apologize to her personally. Mu Hongyu thought for a long time before she finally agreed. It's a deal. After saying that, Mu Hongyu's figure quickly disappeared from the room. Yengu heaved a long sigh of relief. Looking at the empty room, he could not help but mutter, Looks like I'm really close to breaking through to the Mahayana realm. After leaving the treasure pavilion, Mu Hongyu went back to her own place. At this moment, another silver light flew up and slowly bloomed in the air. She looked up. Qi Han had actually broken through another Grandmaster Xian formation. At this speed he should be able to enter the palace of the illusory god soon, right? At this thought, Mu Hongyu's eyes turned slightly and looked at the palace of the illusory god. At this moment, Lu Yu should also be paying attention to Qi Han's situation. It would be better for her to look for her later. Besides, she seemed to have touched the threshold of the Mahayana realm. Chapter 2390. 3 months passed by in the blink of an eye. On the Star Road, Qi Han had already reached the final Xian formation. Looking at the final Xian formation beneath his feet, Qi Han let out a long sigh of relief. Not far in front of him, Wan Jianfeng was looking at him with a complicated expression. This Qi Han actually came here directly. Even though he took longer than Chu Liyue, his efficiency was already very shocking. One had to know that the 7th divine envoy Jinyun Lai also walked from the beginning to the end and entered the illusory god palace through the Star Road. But Qi Han was even faster. At this moment, the number of onlookers on both sides of the Star Road had decreased by a lot. There was only slightly more than a month left before the Heaven Gate closed. Most people only cared about themselves and didn't have the leisure to care about others. The remaining people were basically certain that they had no hope of ascending to the heavens and becoming a god, so they had already chosen to give up. Of course, there were also many Xian masters who hoped to learn something from Qi Han. They hoped that they could be enlightened like Xiao Ran and break through. Of course, this was actually very difficult. After all, there was only one Xiao Ran in the entire illusory god palace. Qi Han didn't care about this at all. He stared at the Xian formation and raised his hand. A stream of light flew out and quickly condensed into a huge halo in front of him. Obviously, he also planned to use Chu Luiyue and Xiao Ran's method to break this last Xian formation. Wang Jianfeng frowned even more. He wasn't a Xian master, but as a divine envoy he had a certain understanding of the Star Road and Xian formations. Qi Han's performance on the Star Road was simply too shocking. Such talent was definitely above Jin Yunlai's. Also, he was the same as Chu Luiyue. He didn't have a bloodline totem. There was a reason why Chu Luiyue could enter the illusory god palace. Qi Han shouldn't be able to do it, right? Of course he can enter. Chu Luiyue put down the herbs in his hand and smiled. He has already come this far. How can he not come in and take a look? He could complete the Star Road in a few short months. How difficult would it be for him to enter the illusory god palace? Su Li sat opposite her. Looking at her calm expression, she couldn't help but say, "You really can keep your composure. Even I was so excited that I couldn't help but sneak out to take a look a few times, but you didn't go out even once. Those who didn't know better would think that Qi Han was my subordinate. Whether I go or not, the result will be the same," Chu Luiyue said as he put away the medicinal herbs and stood up. Su Li was surprised. "Are you going out?" Chu Luiyue nodded. "I'm going to see Dumpling." Ever since Dumpling left last time, she had not been here. She thought for a moment and knew that it must have been Yu Qian who gave the order. However, Dumpling couldn't come over, but she could. During this period of time he had been busy researching the prescription and had not had the time to take care of Dumpling. He had to go and take a look. Su Li nodded her head and sighed in disappointment. "It's a little boring to be alone." Chu Luiyue raised his eyebrows. Why hasn't Senior Tang Ku come? In fact, she had wanted to ask this question for a long time. Su Li spent most of her time in the illusory god palace. It was reasonable to say that Tang Ku, who was also a refining saint, should have come. However, he didn't. Su Li rested her chin on one hand. He said that he was practicing refining with Shangguan Jing. It's good that he didn't come, so he won't delay my business. Chu Luiyue said with a smile. It seems that Taizu will break through later. I have to thank Senior Tang Ku and you. Su Li waved her hand. Thank me for what? Chu Luiyue smiled deeply and didn't say anything. Su Li reacted quickly and blushed slightly. Little you don't talk nonsense. I didn't say anything just now. Su Li's face turned even redder. Chu Luiyue didn't tease her. He said a few more words and left. Chu Luiyue came to the door and pushed it open. Wang Jianfeng heard the sound and looked back. Finally, he couldn't hold back and came to take a look? Or was he worried that Qi Han wouldn't succeed, so he came to guide him? Chu Luiyue's gaze swept past the Xian formation in front of Qi Han. Wang Jianfeng said coldly, Shangguan Yu, even if you've succeeded and Qi Han is your subordinate, you can't help him. Otherwise, all his previous results will be invalidated. Chu Luiyue looked at him in surprise. Fifth messenger, you seem to have misunderstood. Do I have the words help written on my face? Guys, do you think Qi Han needs help? Wang Jianfeng choked. There was really no way to explain this. After all, Qi Han's previous performance was enough to explain everything. Then why did you come out now? Why did you have to come out now of all times? Chu Luiyue smiled warmly. I'm here to cheer for Qi Han. As she spoke, she took a step forward and said to Qi Han, go for it. Then she really turned around and was about to leave. Wang Jianfeng, everyone, did you really only say these 2 words when you said you wanted to cheer for him? Qi Han nodded. Thank you, master. Wang Jianfeng was also stunned. He subconsciously asked, you're leaving just like that? Chu Luiyue stopped in her tracks. What else can I do? Oh, right. She seemed to have suddenly thought of something and turned around to shout, I'll come back later. I'll be back later. If you go in early, go look for Su Li first and wait for me. Yes. Chu Luiyue nodded in satisfaction and smiled at Wang Jianfeng. Fifth messenger, do you have any other questions? If not, I'll leave now. Wang Jianfeng's face was cold as he waved his sleeves fiercely. Chu Luiyue's eyes curved as she left with light footsteps. Chapter 2391. Chu Luiyue walked straight and arrived at Fengming Mountain. As soon as she stepped through the barrier, she was shocked. Because not far away on Fengming Mountain, there were actually several balls of flames burning. Those scarlet gold flames seemed to have surged out from the rocks of the mountain. They were incomparably hot and jumping about in joy. Even the nearby space gradually became distorted under the roasting of the flames. On the top of the mountain, Dumpling was sitting cross-legged with her eyes closed. The vast and astonishing energy of heaven and earth was crazily surging into her body. Even the current Chu Liyue could faintly feel a trace of danger from the pressure on Dumpling's body. No wonder Dumpling had not made any movements recently. It turned out that she was concentrating on her cultivation. The purest bloodline was indeed extraordinary. In just a few short months, Dumpling's strength had already increased at a terrifying rate. In front of Dumpling, the 2-Tian baby had already grown 6 leaves. At this moment, the green leaves were moving with the wind. As they continued to devour the surrounding energy, they urged a portion of the energy to rush into Dumpling's body at an even faster speed. Chu Liyue watched intently. Dumpling and this 2-Tian baby, in a sense, could be considered to have achieved each other. Seeing that Dumpling was at the critical moment of her cultivation, Chu Liyue did not step forward. She only stood where she was and waited quietly. Not long after, Dumpling swallowed the last bit of energy. The totem between her brows flashed quickly. Then she slowly opened her eyes. Who are you? Seeing that familiar figure, Dumpling was overjoyed. She quickly got up and ran over. Only then did Chu Liyue step forward and carry Dumpling up. It was soft and sweet, snow-white and cute. Dumpling's 2 small arms tightly wrapped around her neck. Are you? I missed you so much. Why did you come so late? Woo, Chu Liyue kissed her on the cheek. Aren't I here now? Dumpling was obedient. Dumpling huffed angrily. Originally I wanted to look for Yu, but that oracle didn't let me go. Chu Liyue had already guessed that this was Yu Qian's intention. It doesn't matter. Let's ignore him. Let me see if Dumpling has become much more powerful after not seeing her for a while. When Dumpling heard the praise, she immediately threw all the unhappy things to the back of her mind and revealed a smile that was waiting for the praise. Of course. I'm about to open my 8th meridian. Chu Liyue was secretly amazed. Feng Ming Mountain was indeed powerful. Dumpling had only been here for a short period of time, and she was already about to open her 8th meridian. Of course, this also had something to do with Dumpling's bloodline talent. If it was any other crimson gold heavenly phoenix, they would definitely not be able to compare to Dumpling after staying here for a while. By the way, Yu, have you seen the first oracle in the palace of the illusory god? Dumpling's question stunned Chu Liyue. No. Why are you asking this? Dumpling pouted, rolled her eyes and said, Nothing, I just feel that this first oracle should be more powerful than the second oracle, right? Chu Liyue smiled and nodded. Of course. If only the first oracle could beat him up. Dumpling said angrily. Chu Liyue gently scratched her nose. He guessed it right. Some time ago, the second oracle knelt in front of the first oracle's door for 3 days. Dumpling's eyes widened. Really? What? No one knows the reason, but the punishment was indeed given. And since then, the second oracle has stopped a lot. Anyway, she hadn't seen him for a while. It was understandable. Everyone in the palace of the illusory god knew about his kneeling. No one would want to go out at this time. Dumpling snorted. How is kneeling for 3 days enough? If she had the chance, she would teach him a lesson sooner or later. Chu Liyue said, Qi Han is about to finish the star path. Do you want to go with me? Dumpling immediately became happy. Originally, she was a little worried about Yu Qian's threat, but now that Yu was here and the first oracle had punished him, he probably wouldn't have the time to find trouble with them. I'll go with Yu. At this moment, the Xian formation in front of Qi Han was more than half completed, and only a few were left. He stared at the Xian formation with full concentration, and his eyes reflected the bright light. Everyone held their breaths and waited. Even Lu Feng became nervous and clenched his fists tightly. Envy was envy. Complaints were complaints. In his heart, he still hoped that Qi Han could succeed. Finally, Qi Han's hand trembled slightly, but he firmly pointed at the center. Buzz. In an instant, the last Xian formation was successfully activated by him. On the star path, light shone again. Everyone looked at this scene in shock and speechlessness. In just a few months, this was the 3rd time the same scene had happened. Even though they had already expected this ending when they saw it for themselves, they couldn't help but be filled with emotions and shock. Why were all of them so heaven-defying? Qi Han turned around to take a look. The star path was long and countless stars gathered and spread toward the heavenly gate. A rare faint smile finally appeared on his face. Then he turned to look at Wang Jianfeng. Wang Jianfeng took a step back and said expressionlessly, "Open the door and you can enter." Although his voice was cold, his eyes were fixed on Qi Han. Obviously he was very concerned about this. Qi Han nodded and walked forward. He placed his hand on the door. It was cold to the touch and extremely heavy. He exerted force, and the tongue at his waist suddenly fluttered in the wind. The door didn't move at all. Wang Jianfeng narrowed his eyes and a faint sneer appeared on his lips. The illusory god palace had extremely strict requirements for cultivators. Those without a bloodline totem couldn't enter. Previously, Chu Luyue was only able to enter because of special circumstances. But Qi Han was different. He definitely couldn't enter the illusory god palace. Qi Han exerted more force, but the door still didn't open. There wasn't even a crack in the door. Lu Feng frowned. The onlookers also looked at each other. What was going on? Was Qi Han really going to be rejected? Suddenly, Qi Han stopped and took half a step back. Wang Jianfeng thought that he was going to give up. He said calmly, "I told you long ago that you can't open this door. Giving up now doesn't count as..." Qi Han ignored him. He stepped forward again and pushed. Wang Jianfeng sneered. "What are you still thinking?" Creak. Before Wang Jianfeng could finish his sentence, the door opened slowly. Everyone was stunned on the spot. Qi Han looked ahead calmly. Suddenly he grabbed Tuan Xnz, which was hanging on his waist. Chapter 2392. Tuan Xnz, which was swaying in the wind, suddenly quieted down. The words on it, which were so obvious that they were about to burst out of it, also faded a lot and returned to its original appearance. Qi Han looked forward. The majestic and sacred palace of the illusory god stood quietly. He slowly tightened his grip on Tuan Xnz. It seems that we came at the right time?" A clear female voice broke the deathly silence in the area. Everyone subconsciously looked back and saw Chu Luyue holding Dumpling's hand and walking toward them. Hearing this, Qi Han also looked over. He silently released Tuan Xnz in his hand and bowed in salute. "Qi Han greets master." Chu Luyue smiled and said, "Why are you so particular? You just finished the star path and it's time to celebrate." Dumpling also raised her face and gave him a thumbs up. "Brother Qi Han, you're amazing." Qi Han's gaze fell on Dumpling's face and a smile quickly flashed across his eyes. "Since it's a coincidence, let's go in together." "Master." Lu Feng's pitiful voice came from the side. Chu Luyue coughed. Lu Feng continued to work hard. "Lu Feng, is this something that can be achieved by hard work?" "Master, do you have some misunderstanding about hard work?" Chu Luyue thought for a while and comforted her. "Don't worry, although you're not the first, as long as you're not the last." Lu Feng. "Master, this kind of comfort is better not to give." Dumpling waved her hand. "Brother Lu Feng, we're leaving first." Lu Feng. She couldn't stay here any longer. Looking at Lu Feng, who was about to go berserk, Chu Luyue finally mercifully swallowed the rest of his words. If this went on, Lu Feng might really go crazy. She looked at Wang Jianfeng and smiled. "Fifth Oracle, don't you want to go in together? I'll have to trouble you to arrange Qi Han's residence. Of course, if you're too lazy to go, you can let Qi Han live next door." Wang Jianfeng's chest seemed to be surging with emotions. Until now, he still couldn't figure out how Qi Han had opened the door. But now was obviously not the time to pursue these matters. He didn't reply to Chu Luyue and walked inside with a sullen face. At this moment, a familiar voice came from behind. "Wait." Chu Luyue turned his head and said in surprise, "Hongyu, why are you here?" Suddenly, her voice paused as she looked at Mu Hongyu. Her eyes were filled with shock. Mu Hongyu seemed to be different from before. On the surface, Mu Hongyu did not seem to have changed. However, when she walked over, the surrounding space actually flowed slowly with her. Every movement of hers seemed to be exceptionally relaxed and natural. It was like a gust of wind moving freely. She was clearly not walking fast, but in the blink of an eye she was already in front of everyone. Most importantly, it didn't cause the slightest energy fluctuation. "Broke through?" Chu Luyue asked in surprise. Mu Hongyu's almond-shaped eyes sparkled. "Yes. I came to find you as soon as I succeeded. I didn't expect to meet you here." As she spoke, she looked at Wang Jianfeng. Fifth Divine Envoy, let's go in together? Since she had reached the Mahayana realm, she naturally had the right to enter the illusory god's palace. Even Wan Jianfeng, who had seen many big scenes, was shocked at this moment. Mu Hongyu blinked. Fifth Divine Envoy, I won't stop you from entering, right? Do I have to open the door myself? But I can go through the door directly, so I don't have to, right? Wan Jianfeng's eyelids twitched violently. It took him a lot of effort to suppress the emotions in his heart. He turned around without saying a word and walked towards the illusory god's palace. Chu Liwei raised her chin at Mu Hongyu and smiled. You came at the right time. Let's go in together. Mu Hongyu and Qi Han chose to sit next to Chu Liwei without hesitation. Wan Jianfeng agreed very quickly and left in a hurry without saying anything. The situation had exceeded his expectations. He had to discuss with the other divine envoys as soon as possible on how to deal with it. Mu Hongyu shrugged at Wan Jianfeng's back. He left so quickly. Why are these divine envoys so cold? Chu Liwei pulled her into the house. Qi Han, guard outside the door and don't let anyone in. Qi Han nodded. Yes. Mu Hongyu followed Chu Liwei into the house. Chu Liwei still carefully set up a barrier just in case. Then she looked at Mu Hongyu. Hongyu, are you 100% confident? Mu Hongyu nodded slightly. As long as there are no accidents, we will definitely be able to bring Master back this time. Chu Liwei exhaled and her heart beat quickly. Now is the best time. Everyone had seen them enter the illusory god palace. No one would have thought that at this time, they would quietly sneak into the illusory god's sea. Mu Hongyu's expression was firm. Let's go together. Chu Liwei looked at Dumpling. Dumpling, wait here first. The contract between her and Dumpling could not be known to others. Then Dumpling could only stay here temporarily. Dumpling nodded seriously. Dumpling will definitely wait here obediently. Ayu, you must be careful. Chu Liwei touched her little face. Hongyu, let's go. Mu Hongyu held her breath and raised her hands. Then the space in front of her started to ripple like water. She grabbed Chu Liue's hand and stepped in. The two figures disappeared in an instant. Chapter 2393. On the illusory god sea, a silver bridge stood quietly, extending from the divine gate to the bottom of the sea. The surface of the water was sparkling. However, the sea further away was still dark, treacherous, and mysterious. A cold wind blew across the surface of the sea, bringing with it a bone-chilling chill. It was dark all around. Tyrannical and terrifying spatial turbulence was constantly surging around. Fortunately, Mu Hongyu had already set up a barrier in advance to protect the two of them. Chu Liwei could clearly hear the sound of those forces hitting the barrier, and couldn't help but exclaim secretly. The Mahayana realm was indeed powerful. The current Mu Hongyu could not only directly tear through space, but she could also control the power of the surrounding space. Even a venerable god powerhouse couldn't do this. Up ahead is the place you mentioned before. Mu Hongyu said. She had come to the illusory god sea several times before, and had a rough understanding of the situation here. She clearly knew the location of Chu Liue's first visit to the illusory god sea. Out of convenience, she still brought Chu Liue here. In this way they might be able to find Diwu Zhangzi faster. Chu Liue nodded. If Senior Diwu is still trapped in that place, everything will be easy. The last time she came it was because Diwu Zhangzi was trapped in the surroundings, and there was an extremely tight defense. She didn't dare to act rashly alone. But this time she teamed up with Mu Hongyu and the odds of success were much higher. After a while, Chu Liue suddenly felt a light in front of her. We're here. Mu Hongyu whispered. As she spoke, she exerted force and pulled Chu Liue out of the interspace. A squeezing force quickly crushed her body. But fortunately this was not a problem for Chu Liue now. The sight in front of her gradually became clear. He looked around. It's here, right? Mu Hongyu asked. Chu Liue nodded and then pointed below her. Over there a hazy ball of light flickered. Even though there was still a considerable distance between them, they could still clearly feel the astonishing pressure from it. Mu Hongyu made up her mind. Master is right there. Now all they had to do was set off from here, pass through the chaotic space below, and directly arrive at Diwu Zhangzi's location. Then they would be able to leave successfully. Mu Hongyu said and waved her hand. Then Chu Liue felt that the surrounding spatial energy that was about to crush him was gradually moving away. Then a spatial crack appeared in front of Mu Hongyu. Mu Hongyu stepped inside. However, right at this moment, the voice of a young woman that was filled with rage suddenly sounded out. "Who is it?" Mu Hongyu and Chu Luyue were both shocked. There was actually someone here. The two of them looked at each other and immediately came to a consensus. They had to act as soon as possible. But it was too late. A vigorous and unparalleled force suddenly swept over from the deep sea. Chu Luyue pulled Mu Hongyu behind her and narrowly avoided it. However, the spatial crack in front of the two of them collapsed along with it. Bang! Seeing this, the two of them felt their hearts sink. Their whereabouts had been discovered. It was almost impossible to rescue Diwu Zhangzi now. Chu Luyue made a prompt decision. "Let's go." Mu Hongyu quickly nodded. At the same time, she waved her hand and forcefully tore open the space again. The only thing they could do now was to escape from this place as soon as possible. However, just as she tore open the space, the long whip swung over again. Smack! The road ahead was cut off again. Then a young woman with a delicate figure quickly came from the deep sea. "Who is it? How dare you trespass into the illusory god sea?" As soon as she finished speaking, she had already blocked in front of Chu Luyue and Mu Hongyu. It was a woman who looked no more than 15 or 16 years old. She had delicate features and a pair of green eyes. The 12th Oracle. Chu Luyue was shocked. She had heard of this name long ago but had never seen her before. Unexpectedly, she was guarding the illusionary god sea. Bailing looked at the two of them with undisguised anger on her face. When her eyes fell on Mu Hongyu, she smiled coldly. "It was you the previous few times, right? Humph, I've been waiting for you for a long time." Chu Luyue's heart sank. The 12th Oracle was hiding her strength and had obviously been waiting here for a long time. It would be difficult to leave this place smoothly. "You two are really bold. How dare you trespass in the illusionary god sea?" Bailing had been guarding here all year round, so she didn't know them. She held the long whip in one hand and gently tapped the other palm. She glanced down at the ball of light below. The person imprisoned there is the biggest traitor of the illusionary god palace. The divine lord wants to punish him. How dare you come to save him? You must be tired of living. Chu Luyue narrowed her eyes. "Traitor, Zhangzi. Those who trespass without permission will be sentenced to death." Bailing swung the long whip in her hand. "It's your honor to be killed by me personally." Smack! The long whip flew out in an instant. At the same time, the surrounding space began to crazily squeeze toward the two of them. Mu Hongyu was about to attack when she suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood. Chu Luyue supported her and turned around to stand in front of her. She saw that the long whip was about to hit her back. The biting cold almost made her ears buzz and it was extremely painful. At this moment, an indifferent and low voice sounded. "Bailing, stop." Bailing was shocked and hurriedly turned to look. The first oracle. Chu Liyue's heart shook when she heard this voice. Her body stiffened and she slowly turned to look at the newcomer. Chapter 2394. The sea was cold and the waves were surging. The sound of the long whip seemed to be echoing in her ears. Chu Liyue stared blankly at the person not far in front of her. For a moment she almost thought that she was in a dream and that everything was just an illusion. When Mu Hongyu heard the commotion, she was also shocked and hurriedly looked up. "The first oracle is here?" When that person's face came into view, Mu Hongyu's voice also stopped abruptly. She almost subconsciously looked at Chu Liyue. Her lips moved slightly as if she wanted to say something, but she didn't know how to start. There was silence all around. Chu Liyue could even clearly hear the sound of her heart beating. Her fingertips curled slightly, and a chill came out of nowhere and wrapped around her. This person was so familiar yet so unfamiliar. His features were handsome and his figure was tall and straight. Wearing a well-cut grayish-blue robe, he had a bit of a cold and noble aura that people could only look up to and not climb. He was indeed very different from how he looked in her memory. But his eyes were so familiar, as if they were carved into her heart like a knife. She fixed her gaze on the person in front of her, and the corners of her lips gradually raised into a faint smile. But there was no smile in those starry eyes. Instead, it seemed to be covered with a faint layer of mist, making it difficult to see clearly. She said softly, "Mu Qinghe. Is it fun to lie to me?" The palace of the illusory god. Dumpling was alone in the room. She touched the teacup, touched the table, and even opened the jade bottles on the bookshelf to smell them. When there was nothing else to play with, she finally lay straight on the bed. Her whole body stretched out like the Chinese character. Looking at the curtain above, she mumbled. So boring. Knock knock. Someone knocked on the door suddenly from outside. Dumpling suddenly jumped up. Ayu is back. But just as she ran to the door, she suddenly stopped. That's not right. Fa Yu and the others came back. They should have come straight to this room. Why did they have to knock on the door? Dumpling pursed her lips and walked back. It should be someone else, right? But Ayu said not to open the door for anyone. Qihan was outside. He would definitely stop them. Sure enough, the knocking sound disappeared. Dumpling lazily walked back and climbed onto the bed. Suddenly there was another knock on the door. Most importantly, he was knocking on the door. Dumpling frowned in confusion. Who? Qihan's voice sounded. Dumpling, someone's looking for you. Dumpling was dumbfounded. Looking for me? At this time, who would come looking for her? She thought for a while but couldn't come up with an answer. But Qihan seemed to have let them in? That shouldn't be a problem, right? Thinking of this, Dumpling shouted, He's here. With that, she ran to open the door. Creak. The door opened a crack. Dumpling poked her head out and looked around vigilantly. Brother Qihan, who's looking for me? Qihan looked down at her little head and reminded, Look up. Huh. Dumpling looked up instinctively. Qihan was standing in front of the door looking at her helplessly. Who? Whoosh. Before she could finish, a green shadow pounced on her. Before Dumpling could see anything clearly, she felt two claws grabbing her hair tightly. She was instantly annoyed. Ah, don't grab my hair. With that, she raised her hand to fight back. But at this time only her head was exposed. Her body was inside the door and she couldn't do anything for a while. She could only let the other party grab her hair. Ah, I'm going to be angry. Dumpling's voice suddenly rose an octave. Qihan sighed helplessly and grabbed a certain person who was doing evil. If you have something to say, wait for Dumpling to come out. With that, he helped Dumpling open the door. Dumpling was released and immediately heaved a sigh of relief. However, the pain from her scalp still made her very angry. She looked up angrily. I think you're looking for, Red Demon? The anger in her heart instantly dissipated, leaving only deep shock and disbelief. The green sparrow in front of her had green feathers and red eyes. Wasn't it Red Demon? But wasn't Red Demon already dead? Red Demon. You're not dead. Tuanzi suddenly realized something and screamed out loud. Then she suddenly recalled everything that had happened before and gasped in shock. It's you. It's you who was at Phoenix Cry Mountain. Right? Red Demon didn't answer. It just struggled to flap its wings. Only then did Qihan let go. Red Demon flew over, bit the corner of Dumpling's skirt and began to pull her out. Dumpling hurriedly said, Wait. I haven't made myself clear. Red Demon suddenly turned around and glanced at her. Just this glance made Dumpling's heart skip a beat. After being stunned for a moment, Dumpling immediately followed. I'll go with you. They had been together for too long. Even if Red Demon didn't say anything, Dumpling knew that something had happened just by looking at its eyes. Qihan frowned slightly, but he didn't stop her. Dumpling ran 2 steps before she remembered something and looked back. Brother Qihan, Qihan nodded. Be careful. Dumpling calmed down and nodded hard. She immediately turned around and followed Red Demon. The 2 silhouettes left quickly, gradually disappearing from sight. Qihan didn't look away until they were out of sight. He turned to look at the main hall of the palace of the illusory god. It was towering, standing, and cold. Chapter 2395. Hong Yao and Dumpling soon arrived at the Divine Gate. At this moment, it was as deserted as ever. There was only one figure standing with his hands behind his back. It was Wu Yao. He looked up at the Divine Gate and frowned. This Divine Gate. He had been looking at it for many days and he didn't like it no matter how he looked at it. And his hands were itching. Even he was convinced of his own abilities. Isn't it just a broken door? What's there to care about? But every time he made up his mind to leave, he would always waver and continue to stay here. Wu Yao had been here for several months since he came to the Illusion God Palace. He hesitated for a long time before finally reaching out his hand tentatively. However, before he touched the Divine Gate, he suddenly heard a sound behind him. Wu Yao immediately stopped and looked back vigilantly. When he saw who it was, he immediately heaved a sigh of relief. Dumpling, why are you here? As he spoke, he turned his gaze and saw a green sparrow beside Dumpling. This is Hong Yao. Wu Yao was taken aback. However, before he realized what had happened, Dumpling had already run over. Brother Wu Yao, get out of the way. Wu Yao subconsciously took a step back and hurriedly reminded her, Dumpling, wait here, bang. Dumpling bumped into the transparent barrier, took a few steps back and sat on the ground. There's a barrier. Dumpling rubbed her head and stood up. Only then did Wu Yao see her appearance clearly and couldn't help but be shocked. Dumpling, what's wrong with your hair? One side of her hair was fine, but the other side was loose with a few strands of hair hanging down. Looked like she had just finished fighting with someone, and it was the kind of hand-to-hand combat. Tuanzi was embarrassed at once, but it was not the time to care about this. She hurriedly asked, Brother Wu Yao, can you open this barrier? Hong Yao and I want to go out. Wu Yao was speechless. Dumpling seems to have some misunderstanding about me. Seeing the two of them so anxious, he shook his head and said, only the divine envoys in charge of guarding the gate of heaven can open this barrier. What happened? Why are you in such a hurry to leave? Dumpling shook her head like a rattle drum. Brother Wu Yao, there's no time to explain. Who is guarding the divine gate now? I'll go find him. Before Wu Yao could speak, a voice suddenly came from behind the few of them. Why are you going out? Dumpling turned around. The person who had arrived was none other than the 11th divine envoy, Chiao Tong. As soon as he noticed the disturbance in the barrier, he immediately rushed over. However, he did not expect that the one who caused all this trouble was Dumpling. And there was a green sparrow beside it? Chiao Tong's eyes fixed on Hong Yao for a moment, and she frowned slightly. This cyan sparrow wasn't a divine beast. There didn't seem to be such a magical beast in the illusory god palace. Don't ask so much. There was no time. Dumpling patted the barrier forcefully. Open it. If you don't open it, I'll die in front of you. Chiao Tong was speechless. Wu Yao covered his face. What's with this inexplicable sense of embarrassment? Chiao Tong's expression turned serious. No. Why not? Dumpling was instantly enraged. Chiao Tong felt that Dumpling was purely being unreasonable, so she didn't care about what she said at all. Not everyone can enter and exit the divine gate as they wish. I can't either. Dumpling glanced at Hong Yao, then immediately gritted her teeth, and the pressure around her suddenly erupted. Bam! A ball of reddish-gold flames instantly flew out and landed heavily on the barrier. Boom! A loud sound spread far and wide. Flames burned wildly in Dumpling's eyes. Are you going to open it or not? Illusory God Ocean. Chu Liuyue's voice was very soft, but everyone heard it clearly. Bailing's expression immediately turned cold and her long, shapely eyebrows furrowed. How dare you? How dare you call the name of the first divine envoy directly? Chu Liyue laughed as if she had heard a joke. She tilted her head and looked at Mu Qinghe. Mu Qinghe, tell her, do I have the right to call you that? Bailing turned her wrist and was about to attack again. I think you really don't know who you are. In the Illusion God Palace, even the second divine envoy, Yu Qian, didn't dare to speak to the first divine envoy in such a tone. And this woman was too arrogant. A hand suddenly reached out and blocked Bailing's long whip. He didn't seem to use much strength, but Bailing instantly felt that the long whip was tightly clamped and she couldn't move it at all. Bailing, don't you understand what I just said? Mu Qinghe said lightly, but her tone was unquestionable and domineering. Bailing was shocked and a deep sense of respect flashed across her eyes. She immediately took a step back and said, Bailing doesn't dare. Only then did Mu Qinghe toss the long whip over. Bailing hurriedly caught it and didn't dare to say another word. She looked at Chu Liyue in shock. This woman knew the first divine envoy? And they seemed to have a close relationship. Otherwise, she wouldn't have dared to speak to the first divine envoy like that. But this woman seemed to have just come from the outside. How could the first divine envoy interact with such a person? Mu Qinghe looked at Chu Liyue. It had been a long time since they last met. Compared to before, she was even more beautiful. Even in the dark and cold bottom of the sea, she was still as dazzling as a pearl. After a long while, he finally said, the day Diwu Zhangzi betrayed the Illusion God Palace, it was destined that this would happen. The Mahayana realm is indeed not bad, but you've probably forgotten that Diwu Zhangzi is also in the Mahayana realm. If even he can't escape from here, it's even more impossible for you. Mu Hongyu bit her lip. Leave in half an hour and I'll let bygones be bygones. The first divine envoy? Bailing looked at him in disbelief. These two people sneaked into the illusion god's sea several times and even tried to kidnap Diwu Zhangzi. How can we just let them go after committing so many crimes? Yes, how can we just let them go? Chu Luyue said and took a step forward. Mu Hongyu wanted to hold her hand but she paused halfway through. She didn't know what to do now. No wonder she felt a little familiar before. It turned out that, but why was the first divine envoy Mu Qinghe? Let bygones be bygones, Chu Liyue said slowly, mulling over these words with a faint smile. Mu Qinghe, are you qualified to say this to me? Her gaze fell on Mu Qinghe's face and scanned it bit by bit. This person was once the person she trusted the most. But now, he stood in front of her with such an identity and told her that he was willing to let bygones be bygones? Suddenly her gaze froze. There seemed to be a burn mark on the side of Mu Qinghe's ear. Was it left behind by the fire? Then she looked into his eyes as if she wanted to find an answer from those eyes that were as calm and indifferent as a dark pool. You haven't answered my question. Mu Qinghe, I gave you this name. Why can't I call you that? Digression. I wanted to write more but something happened when I went out in the afternoon so I didn't have time. This should be the last time the miracle doctor is going to update. Thank you to Lizzie's scepter, cloak and yacht. Thank you to Hoof 36 Lulu. Thank you to a certain cloak whose name is a string of messy WeChat characters but is at the top of the fan list. Thank you to all the friends who sent me flower diamond bomb. Thank you to all the big cuties who gave the miracle doctor monthly tickets and recommendation tickets. Thank you to all of you. Chapter 2396. The streets of the city were bustling with noise. His clothes were ragged and he was being bullied. She held out her hand to him. She said, "Come with me." It was a snowy night with a light breeze. In the quiet palace he was at a loss for what to do and felt uneasy. She handed the pen over. She said, "Let me teach you." She thought that since she was the one who brought him back he would belong to her from now on. Of course she would have to give him a name and keep him safe. Mu Qinghe, Mu Qinghe. She gave him a name, gave him a place to live and gave him everything. And in the end what did he leave her? Most likely, everything had been burned to ashes in that fire. She knew that she wasn't a pure and kind person. She had always taken revenge even 10 times or 100 times over. There were many people who wanted to kill her and take her life. They wanted to see her fall from the clouds into a quagmire, unable to struggle. But he definitely shouldn't be one of them. When Chu Liyue saw that Mu Qinghe had also died in that fire he thought that everything was over. All the injustices in the past should be gradually erased along with life and death. However, Mu Qinghe was not dead. Not only did he not die, he even transformed into the #1 divine envoy of the illusory shrine. So noble, so unfamiliar. Mu Qinghe looked calm and indifferent. No emotion could be seen in her eyes. He looked at her as if he was looking at an insignificant person whom he had only met a few times. That is all I have to say, he said indifferently. Bai Ling, who was at the side, was already completely dazed when Chu Liyue spoke. What did she say? Did she give the name of the first oracle? What was going on? Moreover, the first oracle did not refute him. Did he agree with her words? Where did this woman come from? Chu Liyue raised his eyebrows slightly. Are you unwilling to tell me or are you afraid to tell me? Is it very difficult for you to admit this? I don't want to fight you. What a coincidence, me too. The corners of Chu Liyue's lips curled up into a smile as he sized him up again. First divine envoy. How can I be your opponent? As the second divine envoy, Yu Qian's realm was above her eminences. Mu Qinghe was able to make Yu Qian kneel outside the door for 3 days and 3 nights. Naturally she was stronger than him. In just a few short years, everything had changed. Mu Qinghe paused for a moment and then asked, "What do you want?" Chu Liyue had never expected to hear such a sentence from Mu Qinghe. However, compared to the impact his true identity had on her, this was nothing. The smile on her face gradually disappeared, as if it was covered with a thin layer of frost. Since you already know, then I'll be frank. What I want is very simple. Let Diwu Zhangzi leave. That's impossible, Mu Qinghe immediately denied. Regarding this matter, I've already made it clear enough. For the sake of our past relationship, I'll let you go this time. But there won't be a next time. If you come again, I won't be merciful. Merciful? Chu Liwei narrowed his eyes and sneered. When you killed me back then, you didn't seem to be merciful either, did you? Mu Qinghe's hands slowly clenched by her sides. Chu Liwei stared at her with a half-smile. I must save Diwu Zhangzi. If I don't succeed this time, there will be a next time and a time after that. Since the illusory god ocean is under your control, then, I think, why don't we act today and get rid of all future troubles? She raised her head slightly, revealing her slender and fair neck. Mu Qinghe, if you have the ability, kill me again. Mu Qinghe's eyes seemed to surge with emotions, but they quickly disappeared. He stared at her and said slowly, Do you think I don't dare? As soon as he finished speaking, he flicked his wrist and a sharp sword appeared in his palm. Swoosh. The cold blade was pressed against her neck. Mu Qinghe. Mu Hongyu immediately exclaimed. Are you crazy? Although she didn't know much about Mu Qinghe, she knew a little. In the Tianling dynasty, who didn't know that Mu Qinghe was groomed and promoted by the princess? She was shocked for a long time when she heard that Mu Qinghe had betrayed Chu Liwei. Because she couldn't understand how Chu Liwei could do such a thing when he treated such a person with sincerity. Even now he had become the first oracle, but he still wanted to attack Chu Liwei. Mu Qinghe ignored Mu Hongyu. Chu Liwei suddenly laughed, but there was no surprise in his eyes. Hongyu, why are you so shocked? It's not the first time he's done this. Maybe it'll be easier this time. Mu Qinghe's expression was piercingly cold. A majestic aura descended and he flipped his wrist and was about to slash down. At that instant, an extremely nervous voice could be heard. Stop. Immediately after, a reddish-gold flame flew over from afar and landed heavily on the sword. At the same time, a green shadow crashed into Mu Qinghe's wrist. His hand was slightly deflected, and the long sword narrowly brushed past Chu Liwei's shoulder. There was a slight pain. Chu Liwei glanced sideways. There was a shallow cut on his shoulder, and dark red blood gradually seeped out, staining the ground. A small person stood in front of him. It was Dumpling. Don't bully Ayu. Chu Liwei frowned slightly. Dumpling, why are you here? Didn't I ask her to wait in the palace of the illusory god? Dumpling quickly turned around and saw the wound on his shoulder. She was so angry that her face turned red. If she came a moment later, Chu Liwei hugged her and patted her back gently. Dumpling, don't worry. I'm fine. Tuanzi pursed her lips and her big black grape-like eyes were red and full of tears. Chu Liwei touched her messy hair. How did you end up like this? Suddenly she paused and looked up as if she sensed something. A palm-sized green sparrow was looking at her from not far away. Green flames covered its long feathers, and its eyes were as beautiful as the most precious rubies. It was exactly the same as in her memory. Hongyao. Chu Liwei was stunned and his lips moved slightly. Just now, it was the red sparrow that knocked away Mu Qinghe's hand? Hongyao looked at her without blinking and big drops of tears fell silently. Chu Liwei's heart suddenly seemed to be twisted by something, and it was sour and painful. She pursed her lips and said softly, Hongyao, come here. Red Demon took a step forward subconsciously, but it only took one step before it came to its senses and stopped. Mu Qinghe was right behind it. Now that the two of them were confronting each other, it could only stay here. As more and more tears fell, Hongyao waved its wings fiercely, buried its head under its wings and wiped it. It couldn't bear to look at her, but it would cry again as if it couldn't stop. It was so embarrassing. But it missed her so much. Chapter 2397. Mu Qinghe's gaze fell on Hongyao, cold and indifferent. Hongyao. Hongyao suddenly turned around and looked at him angrily. Why did he attack? Mu Qinghe's gaze was as cold as ice, chilling to the bone. The first divine envoy? Qiu Tong, who had followed behind Dumpling and Hongyao, looked at the scene in front of him in shock. What was going on? The first divine envoy was actually here. Although the illusionary god Ocean was indeed under his control, hadn't he always stayed in his courtyard all these years and never went out? It was said that even when he punished the seventh divine envoy Jin Yunlai, he only sent out a wisp of his aura and didn't appear at all. But now, this was clearly the first divine envoy himself. Beside the first divine envoy stood Bailing. Qiu Tong knew that she had been guarding the depths of the illusionary god Ocean, so he wasn't surprised to see her. But the key point was the two women standing in front of the first divine envoy. Shangguanyu? Mu Hongyu. Why are you here? Mu Qinghe glanced at him. Qiu Tong, you're really competent as the Heavenly Gate Guardian. Qiu Tong's heart skipped a beat. Qiu Tong is incompetent. Countless guesses instantly surged in his mind. Could it be that Mu Hongyu had broken through to the Mahayana realm? That was the only way the two of them could come to the illusionary god ocean so quietly. Moreover, they actually alarmed the first divine envoy. Just take it as a warning to you. If you don't believe me, you can try again. Mu Qinghe said coldly. These words were obviously directed at Chu Liyue. Chu Liyue's lips curled into a sneer. Okay. Mu Hongyu stepped forward and grabbed her arm. Liu, let's go back first? The current situation definitely couldn't continue. They could only leave this place first and think of another way later. Looking at Mu Qinghe's posture, he would really do it. Chu Liyue hugged Dumpling tightly and glanced at Mu Qinghe. I will take back what belongs to me. Mu Qinghe did not say anything. Mu Hongyu tore open a spatial crack and pulled Chu Liyue away. Even though Mu Qinghe and the others had already found out about it, the fewer people who knew about it, the better. Seeing the two of them leave so openly, Bailing finally couldn't hold back anymore and said, First Oracle, are you really going to let them go just like that? They were so arrogant and unbridled. Not to mention her, they did not even put the first divine messenger in their eyes. Could it be that the first oracle's heart had softened? Just because of that Chu Liyue? Bailing couldn't figure it out. As oracles they had always been high and mighty. When had they ever been provoked like this? Especially since the person being targeted was the first oracle with the highest status. Mu Qinghe glanced at her. Bailing's heart skipped a beat and she quickly swallowed the rest of her words. She was also muddle-headed to dare to question the first oracle in front of her. I don't want to hear about what happened today from anyone else, understand? Bailing and Qiu Tong understood and immediately said, yes. Mu Qinghe put away his sword and looked at Hong Yao. Hong Yao ignored him and quickly turned to leave. Mu Qinghe frowned slightly, but he didn't say anything. The water rippled and his figure quickly disappeared. Farewell, first oracle. After a while, after confirming that Mu Qinghe had indeed left, Bailing and Qiu Tong heaved a sigh of relief. The two of them looked at each other with complicated expressions. What happened just now? Qiu Tong asked. Bailing's face was cold. What else could it be? Those two secretly came several times before, trying to kidnap Diwu Zhangze. I already knew something was wrong, so I waited here. When I finally caught them and was about to kill them, the first oracle came. Moreover, the two women seemed to know the first divine emissary, especially the one in red. Shangguanyu. Yes, it's her. She seemed to have a close relationship with the first oracle, but I didn't know what was going on after listening for a long time. After the first oracle warned them, he planned to let them go. I tried to stop him, but the first oracle warned me. Qiu Tong frowned. The first oracle is protecting them like this? Bailing thought for a while and said, not really. After all, the first oracle had already attacked just now, but he was stopped by the crimson gold sky phoenix and the blue sparrow. You know what happened after that? I'm sure that they did have dealings with each other. I just don't know what happened. It was extremely difficult to find out if it was related to the first oracle. Right, speaking of the blue sparrow. I don't remember the first oracle having a contract with a fiend beast. When I saw the blue sparrow at the gate of heaven, I was wondering when there was one in the illusion god palace. So it's with the first oracle? Bailing was annoyed. How would I know? It was obvious that there was something wrong here. If the first oracle wanted to hide it, who would know? Qiu Tong frowned. I still think there's something fishy about this. There were so many problems in the past, but the first oracle didn't show up. Why did he come this time? And he even ordered us to keep quiet about what happened today. Was there really no other reason? Bailing didn't think so. This is the illusion god ocean. The first oracle has been in charge of it for 10,000 years. Now that something happened, isn't it normal for him to come? Moreover, Shangguanyu and the other two had quietly crossed the divine gate and arrived here. They had almost kidnapped Diwu Zhangze. If this gets out, not only you and me but also the first oracle will be criticized. Do you want to make a big deal out of it? Qiu Tong quickly waved her hand. How is that possible? I just think it's a little strange, so I said it casually. However, what you said is not without reason. It involves Diwu Zhangze and the illusion god ocean. It's normal for the first oracle to be cautious. Forget it. Anyway, the first oracle has already said that if they come again they will be punished severely. Let's just do our job. Bailing turned and dived into the depths of the sea. Qiu Tong stayed for a while and finally left. Chu Luiyue and the others soon returned to the Illusion God Palace. She put Dumpling down and poured a cup of tea for herself and Mu Hongyu. Finally, she sat down and treated the wound on her shoulder. The wound wasn't deep, but Mu Qinghe's current cultivation level was very high. The power contained in the sword couldn't be underestimated. The room was quiet. Mu Hongyu held the teacup and looked up at Chu Luiyue from time to time. Chu Luiyue looked calm. After treating the wound, she went to comb Dumpling's hair. "Red Demon caught you?" she asked. Tuanzi said, in a low voice. Chu Luiyue nodded and tied the red rope again. Mu Hongyu finally couldn't help but ask in a low voice. "You're not angry?" Chapter 2398. Chu Luiyue paused for a moment then picked up Dumpling. "What are you angry about?" Mu Hongyu mumbled. "Just, Mu Qinghe lied to you." Chu Luiyue thought for a moment and laughed. "I'm not the only one he's biased towards, right? Other than her, the people from the palace of the illusory god didn't seem to know much about his past. Everyone said that the first divine envoy had been in seclusion for several years, but it was obvious that this wasn't the case. He didn't spend those years in Tianling for nothing." Mu Hongyu looked at her. She was smiling, but no one could tell what she was feeling. Probably, anyone in her position would have complicated feelings at this moment, right? Mu Qinghe even attacked her. Chu Luiyue lowered her eyes slightly and paused for a moment before saying, "When I first met him and found out his identity, I was indeed a little angry. But now." She seemed to have thought of something, and the corners of her lips curled up into a faint smile. "The first divine envoy of the palace of the illusory god actually followed me respectfully for several years. Thinking about it, it's not too bad." Mu Hongyu couldn't smile. Dumpling lay in Chu Luiyue's arms, her two chubby little arms tightly wrapped around her neck. She was obviously in low spirits. "Are you?" she muttered. "Hong Yao is actually still alive." Chu Luiyue pinched her little face. "Yes, Hong Yao is still fine. And from what I see, it seems to have broken through to the 9th grade. We should be happy for it." In the past, when Dumpling was still a 9-colored heavenly pheasant, she gave Hong Yao a lot of anger because her grade was 1 grade higher than Hong Yao's. Therefore Hong Yao had always wanted to break through to the 9th grade. Now it had fulfilled its wish. Dumpling looked up at her. "But Hong Yao isn't happy." Chu Luiyue fell silent. I forgot to tell you before. Ever since I went to Fengming Mountain, I often felt a pair of eyes watching me from the shadows. I looked for him several times but I couldn't find him. I even chased him all the way to the illusory god palace, but I still couldn't figure it out." Chu Luiyue was stunned. "Are you talking about the first time I entered the palace of the illusory god?" "Yeah." Dumpling pouted. "I saw the shadow enter the residence of the first oracle. I knocked on the door for a long time, but they didn't open it for me. At that time I was really angry, but..." Chu Luiyue immediately understood. "That shadow is Red Demon?" Dumpling nodded. "I didn't know it was Hong Yao until today when Hong Yao took the initiative to come here." "Hong Yao came to find you?" "Yes. If it wasn't for it, I wouldn't have known that you were in such danger in the illusionary god sea. Later Hong Yao and I wanted to go out, but that oracle didn't agree no matter what. I said that I wanted to break the barrier and he reluctantly agreed." Mu Hongyu shrunk her neck in silence. Break the barrier. Only Dumpling could do such a thing. Chu Luiyue was deep in thought. Hong Yao took the initiative to find Dumpling? Dumpling suddenly turned over and jumped down from Chu Luiyue's arms. She hugged her arm and asked eagerly, Let's go and get Hong Yao back." "Eh?" Chu Luiyue sighed softly. "After all, it's Mu Qinghe's magical beast." Dumpling was indignant. "He's already the first oracle. What kind of divine beast can't he want? Is Hong Yao, a 9th grade magical beast, still missing?" Chu Luiyue's eyes flickered slightly. Puff. Hong Yao flew back to the courtyard and plunged into the pile of fallen leaves. Then Mu Qinghe's figure slowly appeared in the courtyard. He didn't even look at Hong Yao. He walked straight to the room and said coldly, "From today onwards, you're not allowed to take half a step out of here." Hong Yao suddenly flew out of the leaves and arrived in front of Mu Qinghe. Mu Qinghe stopped in her tracks. The human and the beast looked at each other. Perhaps because it had just cried, Hong Yao's eyes were particularly clear. At this moment, there was still anger in its eyes that hadn't dissipated. Mu Qinghe's expression was cold and unmoved. After a long time, Hong Yao turned around and left. Mu Qinghe pushed the door open and entered. Qi Han stood outside the door and watched quietly. Finally, there was the sound of the door opening. He looked back and saw Mu Hongyu walking out of the room. Compared to the excitement she had when she came, she couldn't hide her disappointment and looked a little haggard. She couldn't be blamed for being like this. She had always thought that after breaking through to the Mahayana realm, she could successfully rescue Diwu Zhangze. Who knew that things would develop to this point? Mu Qinghe already knew their plan and would definitely guard him more strictly in the future. It would be extremely difficult to rescue Diwu Zhangze again. He was the first oracle. It was obvious that he was on the palace of the illusory god's side. Thinking of this, Mu Hongyu suddenly gritted her teeth and quickened her pace to leave. What did you say? The first oracle is Mu Qinghe? In the room, Jian Fengqi was shocked and almost suspected that he was hallucinating. He suddenly stood up. Did you see wrongly? Mu Hongyu smiled coldly. He admitted it himself. How could he be mistaken? Jian Fengqi's mind went blank. He couldn't even speak. Mu Hongyu took a step forward and questioned him. Aren't you very close to him? Did you already know that he's the first oracle? Jian Fengqi felt extremely wronged. I really didn't know. His voice stopped abruptly. Mu Hongyu frowned. Just what? Jian Fengqi took a deep breath. I just met him by chance. We're not close, not close. Mu Hongyu stared at him. What did you say just now? Jian Fengqi felt a chill on his back. After a long time he said helplessly. I really didn't know about this. Chapter 2399. Mu Hongyu looked at him suspiciously. Jian Fengqi raised his hand. I swear this has nothing to do with me. Didn't you just say that the other oracles don't know about his past in Tianling? This proves that those things were basically arranged by him, don't you think so? Mu Hongyu thought about it carefully and gradually let go of her suspicions toward Jian Fengqi as she coldly snorted. Even if you didn't know about this, you didn't hear anything about his betrayal of Lu Yu? Jian Fengqi leaned back in his chair. If I had known, that wouldn't have happened. Even though he had been defeated by Chu Luiyue for the past few years, he still respected her a lot in his heart. He knew that it was because of Chu Luiyue that he could continuously improve his strength until today. It's just that, Jian Fengqi hesitated. Half a month before the incident he had been in seclusion. I went to find him several times, but he refused to see me. At that time I didn't care, but who knew? Mu Hongyu sneered. He planned this a long time ago, so it's not strange that this would happen. That's right. He planned this all along. Jian Fengqi tapped his hand on the armrest. I only realized this later on. I even think that even if Jiang Yuqing and Shangguanwan didn't exist, he would still do it. Mu Hongyu pursed her red lips. I know he did it for the zither score. After all, she was the first oracle of the illusory god palace. Wasn't that easy to explain? Jian Fengqi asked. At that time, the zither score had already recognized her as its owner. If he really wanted it, he could have just taken her back to the illusory god palace. Why did he have to be so ruthless? Mu Hongyu was stunned. Moreover, don't forget the princess has never really died. Ayu, why do you think he went through so much trouble? Dumpling was lying on her stomach on the bed. She rested her chin on her hands with a blank expression on her face. Furthermore, since he is the first divine envoy, why would he listen to Immerse? Immerse was the sixth oracle. Logically speaking, his status and power were far inferior to Mu Qinghe. But at that time Mu Qinghe did suffer a lot from Immerse. That can't be fake. If he wanted to put on an act for you, he didn't have to do that. After all, he had already made a move on you. Since they had already shed all pretenses of cordiality, there was no need to put on such a boring show. There was really no need for that. Chu Luiyue sat by the window with a chessboard in front of him and a chess piece in his hand. Hearing Dumpling's words, her eyes flickered. In fact, she was also thinking about this problem. Unfortunately, Immerse was already dead. There was no chance to ask anything. The only person he could ask was Mu Qinghe. But she guessed that he wouldn't say anything. The wound on her shoulder was still aching, reminding her of everything that had happened before. The current Mu Qinghe was no longer the beggar she picked up from the streets. Or, everything was just a trap from the beginning? She laughed and put down the chess piece in her hand. Pa, the 11th and 12th oracle don't know about Mu Qinghe's past in Tianling. Then it's normal that Mo Shiqian doesn't know. Judging from Mo Shiqian's reaction at that time, he definitely didn't know about Mu Qinghe's true identity. Dumpling suddenly understood. That's true. Then could it be that he doesn't know either? Chu Liwei lowered her eyes and was silent for a long time before saying, I don't know either. She was full of doubts about everything about Mu Qinghe. She couldn't guess what was true and what was false, and she didn't want to guess. In short, he only has one identity now, the first oracle of the palace of the illusory god. Other than that, he might have long forgotten his past. Who would want to remember what he looked like when he was at his most embarrassing? Even if it was a disguise for someone like the first oracle, he probably didn't want to leave any memories of those years when he bowed and groveled beside her. Tuanzi turned over and lay on her back on the bed. Her two short legs kicked here and there. I really want to find him and ask him about it. If it doesn't work, it's good to release Hong Yao. Chu Liwei reminded her. Now that he has regained his identity, Hong Yao probably won't come again. In the past, when everyone didn't know the inside story, Hong Yao could still secretly go to Fengming Mountain to see Dumpling. But now the naked truth was in front of them. The two sides were on opposite sides. It was definitely not convenient for Hong Yao to have any close contact with them anymore. Dumpling was angry and sad. How could this be? Chu Liwei looked at the chessboard. Yes, how could this be? Dumpling stayed with Chu Liwei for a day and then returned to Fengming Mountain. After experiencing this incident, she once again deeply felt that her strength was still not enough. Mu Qinghe had already become the first god's messenger and even injured Ayu. She had to become more powerful as soon as possible. Chu Liwei went out for a walk and found that no one knew what happened in the illusory god sea. Obviously, Mu Qinghe had suppressed the news. There was only 1 month left before the gate of heaven closed. The streets were deserted, but there were many more people on the star path. At the last moment, the Xian masters who felt that they still had some hope had already begun to take action. When Chu Liwei walked by the star path and took a look, he had already determined the outcome of these people. Previously, Mu Yafeng did not succeed with Jin Yunlai's help, let alone these people. However, Chu Liwei finally understood why Jin Yunlai could not help but help Mu Yafeng. This star path was indeed too difficult for these Xian masters. If not a single person succeeded, then his face would not look too good when the time came. In fact, Jin Yunlai had long seen that Chu Liue's talent was higher than Mu Yafeng's. If he could place his hope on Chu Liue, he probably would not have fallen to today's end. Unfortunately, because Chu Liue did